It catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is...
Well, welcome. It's me, Jonathan Gullis, here on the Political Asylum, stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. I'm looking forward to being with you on the show, talking about a range of issues. But, of course, I want to make sure that we just remind you that there has been this breaking news about an incident that's taken place in Liverpool around the celebration and parade for Liverpool Football Club's 20th top league division title. We will keep you updated as the police give us more information, and hope that anyone, of course, that was involved in that incident is safe and is well, and remind everyone please to avoid any speculation until we've heard from authorities directly. Joining me in the studio is a friend of mine, former Labour advisor and a great voice here and a friend of the channel, Mr Matthew Torbett, who's going to be reviewing all the stories with me as we go throughout the day. But of course, I want to make sure again that I've just reiterated to you about Liverpool, just so you're aware. There's a large police presence around Water Street and Dale Street in Liverpool City Centre this evening, and there's pictures, I'm sure will be on our screen, showing a large number of emergency service vehicles. Merseyside police have confirmed that people have been hit by a car, and police spokesperson said, quote, "We are currently dealing with reports of a road traffic collision in Liverpool City Centre. We were contacted at about just after 6 p.m. today following reports a car had been in a collision with a number of pedestrians on Water Street. The car stopped at the scene and a male has been detained. Emergency services are currently on the scene. We will issue more updates as we have them." So that's the latest that we have on what's happened in Liverpool. So we won't speculate any further. We'll come back as and when that is updated. But I would like to get straight on to introducing my first guest of the day. That is the newly elected Conservative Mayor for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, a former colleague of mine, and that is now, and I'm sure I'm about to say Mr, but he's now Mayor Paul Bristow. Paul, how are you?
I'm okay, Jonathan, and you can still call me Paul. You don't have to call me Mayor Bristow or anything, mate.
Well, the reason I want to call you Mayor Bristow, Paul, is because I've just become the Mayor of Kidsgrove Town Council and therefore Kidsgrove Parish. I think this is mayor-to-mayor conversation happening here, albeit obviously yours is on a much grander and bigger stage, but I've managed to get myself some civic bling. Out of interest, do you get any gold chains as part of your role?
I get no gold chains, but after you mentioning Kidsgrove and Talk in Parliament on almost every occasion, I think more people know where that is than they perhaps do somewhere like Peterborough or Cambridgeshire. So don't do yourself down, Jonathan. Well,
you're very kind. You're very kind. Now, Paul, obviously you are newly elected. You're just only in the early stage of getting your feet under the desk. I was just keen to understand and hear from you. What are your priorities as the mayor? There is an awful lot to do. The country is feeling in a very tumultuous place. Things are looking, I'm sure, very very rocky in your constituency and area now as much as it is across the country, whether that be for individuals, whether that be for businesses, and obviously the famous public transport issues and concerns. What is it that you want to focus on? What is it you're going to deliver now as the Mayor for the next 4 years?
Well, on day one, Jonathan, I issued 4 what are called mayoral decision notices. And we have to work together when you're mayors. You have to work with the other constituent parts. So it's a board, and they're the leaders of the different councils in your area. But I issued 4 mayoral decision notices, which means these are things that I want to achieve straight away. And so the first thing was to end the target of reducing car journeys across Peterborough and Cambridgeshire by 15%. I think that was really, really important. I sent back the net zero hub, which actually back to government, which doesn't benefit a single person in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And I also made it clear that we were going to root out waste and we were going to tax people less. Those are my priorities.
And so what tax powers out of interest do you have, Paul? I suppose with all these mayors, we've now got we have district or borough councils, we have county councils, we're getting lots of discussion about unitary authorities. Now we've got mayors and obviously the idea of more mayors coming in future years. What powers do you actually have as the mayor? What can people lay on your door versus actually what you have to work with when it comes to dealing with government or indeed other local authorities?
Well, just on tax, there is a thing called the mayoral precept. So that's like an additional precept on your council tax. Now, the last mayor, the Labour mayor, promised he'd never introduce one. He did, and then he trebled it. So I've pledged that I'm going to freeze it. What I'd like to do is get rid of it eventually, Jonathan, but I've pledged I'm going to freeze it, and no one will ever pay any more mayoral precept tax in Cambridgeshire than they do right now at the end of my term. I will never increase it. Hopefully, if we can root out waste, we might be able to get rid of it. But at the start, I've just pledged to freeze it. But there are lots of other things that I can do. I want to get Cambridgeshire and Peterborough moving. And so one of the big areas that I've got responsibility for is transport. So that's why we ditched that ludicrous goal of trying to reduce car journeys by 15% by 2030. And instead, we're going to start dualling some of our A roads like the A47 and the A10. We're going to connect our 3 cities by much faster trains. It takes 45 minutes to get from Peterborough to London and a similar time to get from Cambridge to London. But to go from Peterborough to Cambridge by train, it takes 55 minutes. So it's ridiculous. So we're going to try and improve that infrastructure there. And thirdly, we're going to build light rail in Cambridge. But look, my job is to boost and to promote Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and I will do that at every occasion. I'm the sort of guy, as you know, Jonathan, when we were MPs together, who's always going to be county first, Cambridgeshire first, party second.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that. And actually, I think it's important when we have these opportunities that we do allow people like yourself to outline what you actually do. And while some viewers might think we're being technical nerds here, I think it's actually important to distinguish and understand what it is that you as Mayor want to do and therefore allow your voters to be able to hold you accountable. But of course, you are also now one of the most senior Conservative figures in this British political scene. Obviously, you've got Kemi Badenoch, clearly the leader of the Conservative Party, but you now have, I think it's yourself and Ben Houchin are the only 2 elected mayors across the country. So your voice will be very important indeed. I was keen to get your view first of all. Reform UK have come out with a policy that they are going to reverse entirely winter fuel payments and restore them back in full and scrap the 2-child benefit cap. Paul, does this go to prove what many Conservative voices have been saying on social media today? Reform are not a right-wing party, they are a left-wing party, and any Conservative considering voting for Reform should rethink.
Well, what they are is it's clear that the country outside the M25, places like Stoke, Jonathan, are a lot more socially conservative than people who live within the M25. That's always been the case. But when it comes to the economy, the Reform are clearly trying to outflank the Labour Party, and they think by promising to scrap the 2-child tax limit that will somehow win them appeals. But actually, that policy was actually quite popular because the people I'm interested in supporting, of course, those who can't work deserve to be supported, but the people I'm interested in supporting are those who are in work, who are actually working, making a difference, doing the things that we all want people to do. So that's the people I want to focus on, not those, unfortunately, for one reason or another, can't work. You know, I don't think it sends a very good message to think that those who have made a decision not to have a 3rd child, for example, because they can't afford it, are basically paying for those who, for one reason or another, have decided to have more children. Look, having children is good. I want people to have children. I want people to have lots of children, but I also want people to pay for them.
Wouldn't the argument be back from Reform and even Labour supporters that ultimately what they're trying to do here is eliminate child poverty? And there's many economists suggesting that 400,000 plus children could be instantly lifted out of poverty by scrapping this true child benefit cap. So actually this is about a moral case to try and end child poverty and support those families here and now, rather than promising, improvement in infrastructure, whether that be to high-skilled, high-wage jobs, to technical education routes. Isn't this about helping here and now, particularly in this cost of living crisis?
Well, I think the moral thing is to reward those who work, those who are self-reliant, those who want to go out and earn money for their family. We need to look after them and keep their taxes as low as possible. I don't think it's moral necessarily to hike taxes on working people and to give even more to those who are not in work. Look, we have to protect people. There has to be a safety net. But it's a safety net, Jonathan. It can't be a lifestyle choice. And that's what we need to do, as far as I'm concerned. I think on welfare, we need to be much more moral when we talk about welfare. It's a good thing, to support those who can't support themselves. But, it comes at a cost. And that cost needs to be kept as low as possible to reward those people who are working, who are contributing, who are paying tax.
And do you support the idea of completely reversing the winter fuel payment cut? Would you like to see, as Reform in the UK is saying, it fully reinstated to all eligible pensioners?
Well, let's just remember why this was introduced in the first place. It was introduced because we've got some of the highest energy costs in the world. It was introduced because we felt it was a good thing to support pensioners who feel the cold more than the rest of us. And it was introduced because it was felt that it was needed. There was a clear need for it. I think we're in a worse economic situation now than when we were when it was introduced. And we're talking about people earning just over 13,000. This is not a king's ransom. Now, people will go, do you think millionaires deserve it? Clearly not. But I think people who earn just above 13,000 should have it, and so and perhaps the most cost-effective way of doing it is not to means test at all. But that we have to look at it. We have to look at it in the round and find the most cost-effective way of doing it, so it actually targets those people who need it.
So, would you be supportive potentially of what the government is rumoured to be looking at, which is making it eligible to all pensioners, but for those who have to obviously file a tax return, that would be clawed back through that mechanism, meaning that actually the scheme would only raise of technically 200 to 300 million rather than the so-called 1.5 billion that Labour promised. Do you think that would be something that you could get behind as Mayor if this government were to introduce it?
Well, I mean, sometimes when you do these, when you apply these means tests, it turns out it costs more to administer the scheme than it would just to give to everybody. So if it costs more, I mean, I'm not ideological about it. I want to save the taxpayer as much money as it can. And if it costs more to administer the scheme, you might as well just give it to everybody.
And Paul, I'm also keen to understand, you talked about obviously the winter fuel being important, like you say, to help those in need. If the government don't make the changes in time that it introduces into this winter, would you be willing to use any of the funding that you've got as Mayor to support pensioners across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough for this winter alone to make sure that they don't face the hardship of having to choose between heating and eating?
Yeah, well, we did look into that, to be honest. I looked at that for the election to see if that was something that I could get behind. I didn't commit to doing that because I didn't have all the facts and the figures and the budgets, in front of me. But if there is something I can do, perhaps working with Age UK, great charity, sort of locally in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, do great many things. If there's something I can do around the edges there to just try and take off that cost on those who are earning just above the pension credit threshold, then I'd be very interested in looking at that.
So we can say this is a commitment from you as Mayor that you're willing to work with, like you say, certain charities or local authorities to support pensioners for at least this winter, whilst waiting to see what the long-term solution is from the government.
I'm going to sit down with Age UK. I'd want to understand what it would cost. I would want to understand whether I could work with Peterborough City Council, Cambridge City Council and the County Council on a scheme. If we could do some sort of match funding thing, that's something I'm really interested in exploring. But forgive me, before I say yes, I definitely am going to do it, I'd need to have those conversations.
Well, it's still a talk exclusive here, Paul, that from the Mayor that you're willing to work with local authorities and Age UK into supporting pensioners, and might well be a lightning rod for other mayors to copy and follow. Now, one of the other things that's come up regularly, I'm sure on your doorsteps, is the asylum hotels. The fact that in communities across Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, hotels are being used to house illegal migrants, which we know is up 37% in 2023 2025 as it was on 2024. 13,500 have now crossed the English Channel, and we're not even in the peak season. Paul, Zia Yusuf put out a claim that Reform UK-led councils were going to take legal action against the Home Office in order to force them to empty hotels and stop dumping people in those communities. Is that something you too are considering doing for your community?
Well, I would certainly support Peterborough City Council and any other council across Cambridgeshire who had a migrant hotel or hostel in their area. I'd certainly support that 100%. I even had a conversation with the Labour leadership of Peterborough City Council and challenged them very specifically on this point. So let's see what they come back with. But we've got the Dragonfly Hotel in Peterborough, okay, which is by a boating lake. Jonathan, you won't know it, but it's a very beautiful part of the city. And 146 single men are now staying in that hotel. And that puts things like the Dragon Boat Festival, which lots of people really enjoy, at risk. I hope that can go ahead. But what I've done is I've set out a public letter to our 2 Labour MPs for Peterborough and asked them if they will work with me in trying to get that hotel stood down. I got the Great Northern Hotel, which was once the flagship hotel for Peterborough, stood down when I was the local MP. There were things we did, there were tricks we did, there were cases we made. We worked with, believe it or not, refugee charities in Peterborough to say that they had had too many already coming through their system, so we got a whole collection of people supporting us because there's not the resources to support those charities. And we succeeded, and we got the Great Northern Hotel stood down. But as of yet, the 2 Labour MPs have not said they want to work with me, instead sent me a snotty response back. I don't think that's good enough, and I'll keep challenging them until they sit down with me and work with me. Because, look, I'm not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere for a number of years. We have to learn to work together.
Well, out of interest, Paul, we've seen that news is breaking about the idea that the Labour government are looking to try and do deals with countries like Kosovo and other Balkan nations to create these return hubs, something similar to what Italy's done with Albania, which has actually seen a reduction in illegal migrant crossings into Italy. Are you convinced this is a good idea? Is this just Rwanda 2.0, or is this some... do you think Labour's talking tough ultimately are going to come a crop to the same issues, challenges on the Human Rights Act grounds, as well as the European Court of Human Rights interfering?
You remember what we were called by Labour MPs when we were supporting Rwanda and we wanted, a similar tough approach. Do you remember that?
Yes.
It's hypocrisy in the extreme. Now, look, I know that it's slightly different in the sense they're talking only about those who've failed their asylum applications being returned to these hubs. But that principle of using an offshore deterrent, it's the same thing, isn't it, Jonathan? For 1 minute, when you and I were talking about it, when the government was talking about it, and we were pushing Rwanda, we were called all sorts of outrageous names. But for them, suddenly it seems okay. Ridiculous.
And then finally from me, Paul, obviously you won't be missing the fact that the polls are showing the Conservative Party's going through a pretty rough time. Lots of polls saying the Conservatives are now in between 17 and 19%, some having us at 21%. There's been a lot of criticism in the papers recently about Kemi Badenoch, about whether or not she should continue as a leader. Do you think Kemi is right to be leader of the Conservative Party, or do you think there needs to be a realisation that perhaps she's just simply not up to the job?
Kemi, I'm going to support 100%. We're recovering from the worst ever election performance the Conservative Party ever had in 2024, and it's going to take more than 6 months to turn that around. We let people down in those kind of last 2 years. What happened in 2022, Jonathan? You'll remember this. What happened? The Conservative Party obviously got rid of Boris Johnson, and we abandoned what I would call the realignment. And I know there was that interregnum with Liz Truss, less said about that, but there was that interregnum. But what we did is we abandoned that realignment and we went back to a technocratic managerial approach. And that was rejected overwhelmingly by the electorate. Now, in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, we've got the same approach, but even worse. That's technocratic and managerial approach where you can't seem to say anything or stick to anything. And the hypocrisy is just absurd. Now, look, what have Reform done? Okay, Reform do angry. Okay, they are understandably lots of people who are angry about this, and Reform are trying to attract those people. What we've got to do as Conservatives is remember the lessons of the 2019 election and offer hope and optimism. Because if you remember, that election wasn't just about Brexit, it wasn't just about stopping Jeremy Corbyn, it was also about levelling up, it was also about 40 new hospitals, it was also about the things that we can do in the public sector to offer people hope. That's what we need to do again. Well,
Paul, you talk about the 2019 election, and you did mention his name earlier on in your answer, a certain Boris Johnson. You were, and I've always been, a big ally of Boris. Don't you think Boris coming off the play, or coming out of the farmers' fields that he resigned himself to would be good. Don't you think Boris Johnson's the only person who could get any cut through against Keir Starmer, who's got the trappings of the office of the Prime Minister to help him, and Nigel Farage, who is a big political beast and a big personality too? Is it not time for Boris to come out of retirement and save the Conservative Party?
Well, I'd love to see Boris back in frontline politics. And as you remember, I was in the bunker till the end with Boris. You know, I thought it was a huge mistake to get rid of him in 2022 for all the reasons I've just outlined around the realignment and the approach and the people we were trying to attract and the coalition that he built. We seem to have got rid of Prime Minister, leader after leader. That's the problem. You know, we've got Kemi. She's been leader just 6 months, or just a handful of months after the worst ever performance the Conservative Party has ever known. I support her 100%. She's got those right instincts, I think, about what she wants to do. And the worst thing we could do is start changing our leader again.
And when you say Boris into frontline politics, what do you mean, Paul? Would you like to see him back in Parliament? Do you think he belongs on those green benches once again?
Plenty of marginal seats for him in Cambridgeshire to have a go at.
Well, here we go. There's an open offer to Boris Johnson. Mayor Paul Bristow, the Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to go to a break, and before I get Matthew Torbett's reaction to that interview, as well as talking about the fact that Angela Rayner is making a lot of headlines. Is she actually planning a bid for leadership? She's saying she's not, but do we believe her? Call in 0344 499 1000 or text the word talk at the start of your message to 87222 or follow us on X at talkTV. We'll see you shortly.
I know a couple of backbench Labour MPs and a couple of junior minister Labour MPs who I was very good friends with who worked in the party, a couple of whom worked part-time for the party, part-time in the supermarket before the general election, right? These people got into politics because they wanted to make a difference and they wanted to help, as most people do in politics. And they got there on these beliefs, these core beliefs that they thought were shared by the leadership of their party. And then they were asked to vote and support for things that were completely against that.
Talk across the UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back with me, Jonathan Gullis, stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan here on the Political Asylum between 7 and 10 p.m. this evening. In the studio with me is the fantastic Matthew Torbett, former Labour advisor, who's going to be getting in to that interview with Paul Bristow, the Mayor of Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, as well as obviously talking about a few other things. But I just want to keep you up to date with what we're hearing, the breaking news regarding an incident that has taken place in Liverpool city centre around the parade for Liverpool Football Club's 20th top flight league celebration. The latest update that we've had is that the Prime Minister is being kept updated about events in Liverpool after a car collided with pedestrians in the city centre. That's what PA News Agency understands. To remind you, there was a large police presence at the moment around Water Street and Dale Street in Liverpool city centre this evening. Pictures showing a large number of emergency vehicles at the scene. Merseyside police have confirmed that people have been hit by a car and a police spokesperson has said the following: "We are currently dealing with reports of a road traffic collision in Liverpool city centre. We were contacted at just after 6 p.m. today following a report a car had been in collision with a number of pedestrians on Water Street. The car stopped at the scene and a male has been detained. Emergency services are currently on the scene. We will issue more updates as we have them." So that's the latest that we have regarding the very sad news that incident has taken place in Liverpool City Centre. And again, our thoughts and our prayers go out to anyone who has been impacted, and hope that everyone is safe when it comes to that. Matthew, I know quite a hard thing to have to pivot to, but we did have Paul Bristow on. I thought I'd be keen to get your views, first of all, on the fact that he was making a lot of noise about Kevin Badenoch's the right person, but then was keen to say Boris Johnson should return to frontline politics. Is Paul straddling two horses?
I think he's got to be nice, because Kemi went and seen him when he'd won, so it'd be a bit mean to go, oh yeah, she's not really the person I want. He might have to use her on leaflets in a few years' time, who knows. The Boris stuff is interesting. I spoke to a fellow Conservative of yours today, and they said the thing is with Boris is he is supposedly taking soundings. That's all he's doing at the moment.
I've heard the same as you.
Because what he likes, and you'll maybe know this better than me, is he likes certainty. And even if a safe Conservative seat came up and somebody was persuaded to give way, I think in this current climate, even in a Henley, where he's been the MP before and I think lives, I don't think it would be certain in a by-election because of the threat of reform, and therefore, could he win? He's never lost an election that he stood in. Could he win against Nigel Farage? Now, a lot of the polls say he'd be the best person to take him on, but I don't think anything's certain anymore.
Isn't this, Matthew, the drama, the Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua political fight we've all been waiting for? Because even though it wouldn't be Nigel Farage on a ballot paper, we all know that it'll be Nigel Farage front and centre versus Boris Johnson. Isn't this what Westminster, Whitehall, and even certain sections of the political nerdery online are absolutely desperate to see? Finally, those two going head to head, which I don't think has actually happened before.
For me, it'd be more like Chris Eubank Jr. against Conor Benn, because I'd want them to knock each other out. I wouldn't want a clear winner. Just get rid of the pair of them. I think it'd be interesting. I think, listen, it would be a spectacle to say the least, seeing them in a debate. I don't know who'd be telling more fibs than the other and stuff like that, but it'd be interesting. It'd be an interesting battle of the minds, because Nigel appears to have some level of politics that he's stuck to, particularly around the EU, and particularly around certain types of immigration, whereas Boris tends to find the lane that seems most open to him. His politics are quite fluid, I think. We saw that despite being the man that brought Rwanda in, or tried to bring Rwanda in, obviously knowing his electorate as London Mayor, offered an amnesty to those who were deemed illegal immigrants. So it would be interesting. I just don't know if it's the right way forward. And actually, Paul spoke about, the amount of leaders that the Conservatives have got rid of, and it's mostly the Conservatives. They've got this sort of regicide problem. And we don't have patience anymore, and we wonder why nothing gets done. I think that what the Conservatives need to do for me is understand that they are not going to win the next election. It's not going to happen. I think at the moment, a bit like what Labour had for many years, is they've got a credibility issue, and they've got to try and bide their time to get trust back. If they talk about immigration, people go, no, you let everybody in. Immigration was highest it's been since forever. Were you guys there?
The Boris wave is now his nickname by Nigel Farage.
That is now a term that lots of people talk about. They can talk about all manner of things. The economy, they'll say Liz Truss, the way that COVID was handled in many cases. So I think the aim, if they're going to stick with Kemi or not, is to stop the bleeding. And I think we got lucky, if I'm honest, because Liz Truss sort of helped us out. It'd been the end of a long 14 years and people were fed up and wanted change. I think most of us assumed Keir would take 2 elections at least. And the idea is stop the bleeding, build yourselves up and try and win some seats at the next election. If you can get near 200 seats, there or thereabouts, that's a decent platform for Kemi to potentially hand over to somebody to try and finish the job. Maybe a Boris type, who knows? Maybe enough time has passed for him, to not have the COVID stuff after him, or the immigration stuff, because the conversation may well have moved on. But I think they need to think about the credibility and the idea that, much like after Corbyn, you've got to stop the bleeding and build from there, really.
Well, after the break, we're going to speak with James Starkie, former government special advisor to both Priti Patel and Michael Gove, who's going to be telling us his insider thoughts onto how does Labour stop the bleeding? Can they stop the bleeding? Then get Matthew's reaction to that too. Are we on the cusp of seeing Prime Minister Angela Rayner? Join us shortly after the break by calling in on 0344 499 1000, texting the word TALK at the start of your message to 87222, and follow us on X at talkTV. We'll see you shortly.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So it's not.
Oh, sorry, I'm back. Hello, welcome. Jonathan Gullis here, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on Talk here at the Political Asylum. Thank you so much for joining us. Sorry, I was having a chat with Matthew because I was trying to get the team to stick the earpiece in my ear because I keep fiddling with it and it keeps falling out. And my Gen Zers, three of them behind the grass, are trying to keep me in check and keep me honest. But look, let's get on to our next great guest before we head over to Liverpool. That is former Special Advisor to Michael Gove and to Priti Patel. That is the great James Starkie, a friend of mine and a friend of Matthew's too. James, how are you?
I'm very well. Hi, Matthew. Hi, Jonathan.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Now, we've had an interesting chat with Paul Bristow. I don't know if you saw it, but he was like fully back behind Kemi, but at the same time, it'd be great to see Boris on frontline politics. Matthew says Conservatives need to stop changing leaders every few minutes. I'm keen to get your view on Labour, because it's been a tumultuous time before we get to the Conservatives. We see at the moment that Labour is now averaging around 23% in the polls as towards the end of May. They've got the largest drop in opinion polls in the last 40 years of any governing party. It's now as bad as Gordon Brown in 2009 after the economic crash and Jeremy Corbyn post or in the lead up to the 2019 general election, an average fall of 12.3%. We've obviously got the news that Angela Rayner is potentially already on manoeuvres. And then obviously, and actually three categories where Labour dropped the largest were health, housing and the economy. Three things that they've banked a lot on when it comes to winning back voters. Do you think it's all a bit tumultuous, but actually Labour's still got 4 years in power and we're all rushing to the conclusion before we've even got nearer to the election, and actually Labour can and probably will rebound?
I think you reflect, Matthew mentioned a moment ago how impatient the public are, and that's true, and we've seen it in polling. And the comparison in terms of the percentage drop was made in some of the coverage today with John Major's government in 92. I think they saw a kind of 7-8% drop in a similar 8 to 10 month period that Labour have seen. The difference is John Major was kind of right at the end of 13 years of Tory government after Thatcher had left, had no majority to speak of, couldn't do anything. I think Labour have a very large majority. They know what needs to be done. They've stated that. They've stated their missions, their priorities. Maybe a bit confusing because they keep restating different numbers of them. But they know they need to get growth, they need to build houses, and they need to cut immigration and do something on the NHS. And none of this polling changes that. And if they keep reacting to kind of daily polling, weekly polling, and their MPs do, they will end up in the same place the Conservatives did, which is, constantly kind of chasing a news agenda and missing sight of the long-term changes that they will need to get the public's trust back.
Well, it's interesting you say that, James, because, for example, the third runway at Heathrow was a very firm commitment. It's a long-term commitment, but will therefore create economic growth as well as actually creating jobs in and around that area. Abolishing NHS England, something the Conservatives like myself would have said we should have ultimately done ourselves, and therefore will save the taxpayers money. They did have, I think, for 6 months in a row, NHS waiting lists coming down, a small rise recently, but did indeed have them coming down by using that money they have pumped into the NHS. And Wes Streeting being quite blunt about wanting to cut waste and really get the NHS back to its core priorities. On some of the economic decisions they made, it was about actually reassuring the markets they're willing to take tough decisions. Would you be concerned if you were a Labour strategist at the fact that Keir Starmer has made this partial U-turn on winter fuel and is rumoured to now be U-turning on the two-child cap benefit? Is that not undermining their longer-term credibility and the longer-term decisions they made, which ultimately are about, like you say, long-term decisions to pay off and the public will feel and see in longer term rather than chasing the weekly headline?
I think there's two problems with the rumoured U-turn. Was confirmed the winter fuel, the two-child benefit cap is speculation at the moment, but seems quite well briefed. I think there's two problems. Number one, as I just kind of touched upon and you mentioned, I think once you start giving in to various backbench campaigns, they don't say thank you, they come back for more. And this will embolden the various groups. And we've seen now, I think Labour said they've got 4 families. I think you were in one of You're at least one of the five families, Jonathan.
I never call it the
yourself.
five families, James. I never call it the five families, so you know.
We kind of know how that situation goes. So I think they'll kind of come back for more. That's going to be a problem for number 10 and number 11. And with number 11, I think if you look at the combined cost of these two things, it's somewhere around 5 billion. So where's that coming from? There isn't extra money. Why are Labour chasing growth? One, because the country needs it. But for them as a government, they need the tax receipts that growth is going to deliver. And without those, they can't do any of these things, which is what their mantra has been up until now. If they start big giveaways now, when they've got no money, they either borrow more, which, as you said, is a problem in terms of the reputation with the markets, because they're currently really focusing borrowing on capital spending rather than ongoing year-to-year spending, or they tax more, which they promise they won't, and a record high tax rate. Neither of those things are likely to deliver growth. They're absolute number one priority. So I think there's huge risks in the U-turns, yeah.
And then out of interest, going to the Conservatives, because obviously you were a former Conservative special advisor, some polls are suggesting at best that Kemi Badenoch has seen the polls go up by 1.5%. Many polls are suggesting actually that things have got worse since she became leader. Do you think Kemi is in serious trouble? Do you think, for example, Boris Johnson is the answer and saviour for conservatism?
I think, look, Kemi, you could look at another big institution in the last couple of weeks. They're kind of the Manchester United at the moment of politics. They're struggling. They've had a bad period. The fan base is unhappy. They've got new leadership who wants to set a big, bold direction, but they're not seeing results yet. So, do you stick with that and stick with the plan that, maybe United will do with Amorim and the Conservative Party and MPs will do with Kemi? But it's a difficult choice. I mean, you mentioned Boris. I think the thing that would strike me about Boris is I don't know him super well. Obviously, I've spent a bit of time with him. You've spent more time with him. I don't think it's a secret that he sees himself as a kind of Churchillian figure. And it was Churchill that came back after an election defeat directly for Churchill in 45, but came back to be Prime Minister again. So I think absolutely Boris would see it as a possibility. The guy's made more comebacks than anyone I can think of. So I would never put it past Boris. Could he have the same effect? I don't know. He's always, Matthew just reflected on his time as London Mayor. He's always had the ability to reinvent himself. Maybe he could do that again. But it'd be a big call for the Conservative Party.
Do you think it would fall into more chaos? Do you think that keep changing, as Paul Bristow said, leaders actually just lends to the idea that this is a party in decline and eventually, as I've actually said before, and potentially in a death spiral? Or do you think, as you say, that there is just about having to tough it out? Matthew was making the point. You've just got to realise that you're not going to get into government anytime soon. The public haven't forgiven or forgotten you, and it's just about riding out the very bad luck you're up against.
Well, look, I understand that view, but to compare it to football again, it's like you're sliding towards relegation mid-season. Now, what do you do? If you're kind of 16th, 17th in the Premier League, do you hold on and hope that your manager pulls you out of it? People have done that. It's been successful. It's also failed. Or do you pull the chain and you go for Sam Allardyce? So now Boris has gone from Winston to Sam. But do you call for Big Sam to come and rescue you? Maybe that can work. I don't know if there's a science to either, but I don't think you can simply say, well, we're not in a good situation, we've just got to stick where we are. You've got to look and see what your best options are.
And final question for me, James. If you were advising, how would you take on Reform UK? What can the Conservative and Labour Party do to take on Nigel Farage?
I think Farage is hard to beat because people are just tired of the establishment, so they bunch Labour and the Tories into the same thing. I think the biggest weakness Farage could face is being seen as a normal politician. That would be kryptonite to him. If they can drag him in some way into being seen just a typical politician, that would end his appeal overnight.
Well, there we go. The brains and the brawn. As I'm sure he'd like me to say, James Starkie, former special advisor to Priti Patel and Michael Gove, and former staffer on Vote Leave too. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going now straight to a presenter, Nick Ellaby, who is in Liverpool right now. Nick, hi, how are you?
Yeah, good evening, Jonathan. You joined me on, I'm on Dale Street, where we believe the collision happened earlier after the parade to celebrate Liverpool's Premier League trophy today. We expect there are some 1 million people on the streets of Liverpool, but tragically, shockingly, in around 7 p.m. A man, well, we understand a man has already been detained, but a car drove into a number of people who were on the street celebrating Liverpool's trophy win. It's unclear if any people are injured, how many people are injured, how many people were hit. There are a number of videos on social media that show a collision that happened on Dale Street in the centre of Liverpool. Currently, I am stood in front of a cordon of about 15 police officers. They've just moved us back away from the scene. At the scene, there is a fire engine. There are 4 St John's ambulances that were here today looking after and checking on people who attended the parade. There's also a couple of NHS ambulances, a number of police cars, a huge number of flashing lights. And the feeling on the street.
Oh, sorry, we've just lost Nick there with his connection. As you can see, he's dashed to the scene and we'll get him back on very shortly. But just to update you, we have had a spokesperson from North West Ambulance Service. North West Ambulance Service is supporting an incident in Liverpool City Centre following reports of a road traffic collision. We are currently assessing the situation and working with other members of the emergency services. Our priority is to ensure people receive the medical help they need as quickly as possible, and a spokesperson for Liverpool City Council has said we are currently liaising with Merseyside Police regarding an incident on Water Street in the city centre. And then finally, Liverpool Riverside MP Kim Johnson, whose seat includes the city centre, has said, I sincerely hope all those involved are safe and get home to their loved ones soon. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper is also being kept updated about events in Liverpool as the PA News Agency understands. We will have more on this breaking news and other topics after the break. Thank you.
I know a couple of backbench Labour MPs and a couple of junior minister Labour MPs who I was very good friends with who worked in the party, a couple of whom worked part-time for the party, part-time in the supermarket before the general election, right? These people got into politics because they wanted to make a difference and they wanted to help, as most people do in politics. And they got there on these beliefs, these core beliefs that they thought were shared by the leadership of their party. And then they were asked to vote and support for things that were completely against that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. It's me, Jonathan Gullis here, stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on the political asylum up between 7 and 10 this evening. Make sure if you want to call in, 0344 499 1000, text in the word talk to the start of your message to 87222, and of course follow us on X at talkTV. We're going to now change a bit what we were going to talk about and focus on this breaking news regarding this incident that's taken place in Liverpool city centre. Peter broke the news to you at the end of his show on Drive Time. I'm glad to say that Peter Carwell is back in the studio with me, and we'll be discussing alongside Matthew Torbett what the latest is. We have had in the breaking minutes, the Prime Minister released a statement, which I will give bits of, and Sir Keir Starmer has said, the quote, "The scenes in Liverpool are appalling. My thoughts are with all those injured or affected," adding that he was being kept updated on developments and asked that we give the police the space they need to investigate. Peter, what's it you've been hearing and seeing, obviously, in the minutes that you've been, obviously, across this story?
Well, obviously, the Home Secretary, as well as the Prime Minister, dealing with this, hearing the details that we're getting, and also extra details from those on the ground, the emergency services, including the police. I would imagine counter-terror officers are being involved with this as well to see what is happening, although there's no suggestion at the moment that this is a terrorism-related incident. There's quite a number of statements from various people, including the Liverpool Riverside MP Kim Johnson. Her seat includes the city centre where this incident has happened. She says, "I sincerely hope all those involved are safe and get home to their loved ones soon." Some of the eyewitness reports coming out of it as well are very disturbing in terms of the detail. Harry Rashid from Solihull has been speaking to the media. He was at the parade with his wife and 2 young daughters, and some of the detail he gives is too graphic for me to discuss at this time of the evening, but he says it happened about 10 feet away from us. We were just in a crowd. We had no control over where we would be because it's a very narrow street. The vehicle came from our right. It emerged from just right next to an ambulance which was parked off. A grey people carrier just pulled up from the right and went into the people at the side of us. I'm not going to read out all of the detail of what he says because of the time of the evening, but clearly this is a very, very serious incident. The police and emergency services at the scene, North West Ambulance Service there, said we are currently assessing the situation, working with other members of the emergency services. Our priority is to ensure people receive the medical help they need as quickly as possible.
I believe one person was detained at the scene, as all we know at the moment from Merseyside Police.
That's right. We think it's the driver of the car. Certainly, I think it's a man. That's what Liverpool Police are saying, or Merseyside Police are saying. No doubt he is being interviewed as we speak, and the area certainly has been cleared of people. You're, a major celebration for Liverpool Football Club. The fact that probably over 1 million people were in the centre of Liverpool today. The victory, of course, happened about 8 weeks ago, but the celebration was today, and the huge celebration has turned to tragedy here. We don't know the condition, of course, of the people who have been injured here, but we do know that quite a number of people were involved. This was a very populated place, a very busy part of Liverpool. I've been there many times myself. I have friends there. I've stayed in Liverpool. Anybody who knows Liverpool knows that Water Street in Liverpool city centre, a major part. There will have been many thousands of people there. Many of them will have made their way home now. They'll have got out of the way, essentially, to let the emergency services do what they have to do, because of course there will not just be the immediate aspect of this from North West Ambulance Service, making sure that people get the medical help they need. This will also be a matter of evidence, gathering evidence, CCTV footage, all sorts of aspects to this in terms of talking to witnesses, often talking to very traumatised people who've witnessed this, to see from all sorts of angles. There's video which we're not showing you, which is on the internet at the moment because some of it is very, very graphic, but there are many people, of course, videoing this parade, videoing this celebration, and then by accident essentially got the incident on tape. So the police will be looking at social media. They'll be appealing to anybody who hasn't put it on social media, perhaps through not wanting to share it for obvious reasons, getting in touch with the police, sending that information in so they can have a fully rounded view of exactly what happened.
Matthew Torbett, for those of you tuning in, a friend of Talk and former Labour advisor, is joining me in the studio for the next couple of hours. We were discussing this right before we came on air. There are people that you know who are in Liverpool. First of all, are they all well and safe as far as you're aware?
Yeah, no, my partner's fine. My partner's up there. She's a big Liverpool fan. I was ironically supposed to go with her today and chose to be here with you. She's okay. Everyone's a little bit worried. I think the concern for lots of people is the train station isn't currently open, so she can't get back. There's 4-hour delays if it is going to open. It seems to be 1 in, 1 out. There's obviously a lot of concern, and the police will be doing their bit. And I think the Prime Minister's probably right. Despite people's frustrations, the police need time to no doubt associate a motive if there is one, and ensure they're absolutely in full evidence of the facts of what this is. I do hope, and I'm not going to speculate, I do hope if it is our worst fears, they learn from last summer, and they need to be totally open and transparent with people on what this really is, whatever it is, because we do not need to see scenes of frustration boiling over, maybe rightfully so, because people don't feel like they're being told the truth, essentially. So yeah, it's still, there's a lot going on at the moment. There's a lot going on the ground. A lot of the footage that people have sent me who are there, as Peter has said, is horrifying. But the police need to be allowed to do their job and get to the bottom of what this is.
Absolutely, and I think for anyone tuning in and listening to this, I do always urge caution. It's easy to speculate, it's easy to look at a video and to come to a conclusion. We ask everyone to be patient. We ask everyone to allow the police to conduct their investigation and wait for updates. And indeed, I do believe a lot of lessons would have been learned from last summer, and we will get, I think, a much clearer picture. Peter?
Matthew's absolutely right in that he says that now is a huge challenge logistically in terms of the what these people are trained for, whether it's ambulance, police and so on. They're doing their job. They need to be allowed to do their job, and we can't just have an instant answer on this. What we also know from last summer, as Matthew correctly says, is we need to be informed on this, because we've seen, there'll be loads of people who have seen very, very graphic footage this evening, and I'd really caution people, if you've got kids who are near social media, anywhere near Instagram or Twitter or anywhere like that, just be really careful, because there's a lot of stuff out there. I've seen it. I'm not going to describe it at this time of the evening, but there's some very, very graphic footage, and I think people do need to be cautious in what they see themselves and what they watch. But the government, I think the authorities really need to be very, very clear with people, totally open and honest and transparent in terms of what has happened here and what they're doing about it.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, to reiterate, and as Matthew has said before, and Peter have said before, just to remind everyone that North West Ambulance Service have so far said it's supporting an incident in Liverpool City Centre following reports of a road traffic collision. That's how it's being described to us at this moment in time, and we have to report what is being given to us by those in authority. So if you may not like the words we're using, I'm sorry to say that those are the words we will be using, because those are the words being given to us by those in authority. The North West Ambulance Service said they're currently assessing the situation and working with other members of the emergency services, and our priority is to ensure people receive the medical help they need as quickly as possible. We have no updates about how many people may have been injured in this, nor the condition they're in. Everyone here at Talk and at News UK sends their thoughts and their prayers to those who have been caught in this awful incident, as well as their families, friends and loved ones, because I cannot imagine the fear and the horror going amongst those, as Matthew had to experience as someone who wasn't aware of where his partner was at the time when we found out that this news was breaking. And also to remind you, the Liverpool City Council has given out a quote, says, "We are currently liaising with Merseyside Police regarding an incident on Water Street in the city centre." The Home Secretary and the Prime Minister have both also said that they're being kept updated regularly regarding, and I do hope, as Matthew and Peter have both said, that both the government machine understands the very urgent and important need to make sure the media is able to get as much information as possible and be able to get that information out in the public sphere to counter any false narrative that may be pushed online. To again read out the quote from the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer said, "The scenes in Liverpool are appalling. My thoughts are with all those injured or affected," adding that he was being kept updated on developments and asked that we give the police the space they need to investigate. Yes, Pete.
Just one piece of information that has now been confirmed. The person who has been arrested is a 53-year-old white British man from the Liverpool area. The police have confirmed that.
Okay, so you've heard it here first again from Peter. Peter, do you mind just reading that out one more time?
Yeah, certainly. It's just the confirmation that the person arrested after this incident is a 53-year-old white British man from the Liverpool area, and Merseyside Police have confirmed that.
Okay, well, thank you, Peter, for that. And again, important to remember to all of you who are tuning in, that is confirmation that an arrest has been made regarding this incident. It is a 53-year-old white British male who has been arrested, and we hope obviously that we can get to a swift answer about how the status of those who are caught up in this terrible incident are, and we'll be keeping up to date with both Merseyside Police and North West Ambulance Service as to what is going on. Matthew, as you said, your partner's on the ground. She's saying the station is essentially being effectively closed off. Where are people being told to go at this time?
I don't know. She's having a bit of a nightmare. Her hope was to try and get an Uber or some way of travel to Runcorn, a couple of towns on, and then hopefully the station there would be open and therefore a train back down to London. But obviously, I think probably because of the road closures or whatever else, Ubers aren't turning up. I think people are being ferried towards the station, but at the moment I don't know if it's a case of the gates are shut. I'm only getting certain things back from her, and I think that's the other part of the panic is I think a bit like if you're at a festival, the amount of phones that are in one place, there's not a great deal of signal either, so it's coming through in bits, but ultimately her and other people are struggling to try and get anywhere out of the city centre.
Peter, sorry, you got more updates?
Just got the full statement now from Merseyside Police. Just a short statement confirming the information. We would ask people not to speculate, Merseyside Police says, on the circumstances surrounding tonight's incident on Water Street in Liverpool city centre. We can confirm the man arrested is a 53-year-old white British man from the Liverpool area.
Okay, well, there you go. You've heard it again here very clearly that Merseyside Police have now made a formal arrest of a 53-year-old white British male who is, therefore, we presume, the driver of this vehicle, and we now await the outcome of that. As you can see, it's a very live thing. Matthew and Peter doing sterling work, being on their phones, trying to find out what's going on. Matthew, in a horrible way, being able to tell us what's on the ground due to loved ones being there, and thank God they were safe. And again, just to reiterate, everyone here at talkTV, as well as News UK, sends their love, their thoughts and their prayers to anyone who's been a victim of this horrific incident, as well as their family members and their loved ones. I can't begin to imagine the horror and the fear going through many family members. And again, to make you aware, we are not told, we have not been kept updated as to the current situation when it comes to how many victims have been affected, what their status is in terms of their health, but we will keep you updated as and when that comes, and we have got some eyes on the ground too. We will obviously encourage you to call into the show, but I'm going to be frank, I am not going to take calls around this because, as the police have said rightly, we shouldn't be speculating. We in the studio are acting on the information that's been given to us. We, I think, are pleased that there's been a quick statement from the police with a quick identification of the individual that's been arrested. That means that any potential speculation online that I fear might have been pushed around will hopefully be quashed very quickly, and therefore we can actually get to the facts of this case. So it's very, very important.
And you're absolutely right, Jonathan, that some of that speculation was uninformed, unfounded, and we have confirmation from the police. And I applaud the police for actually putting this bit of information out very, very quickly, letting people know exactly what they have done. And this is this 53-year-old white British man being arrested after the Liverpool car ramming incident. He is in custody, police are questioning him, and we will see what happens from there.
Well, look, we're going to be going to a break shortly. We'll have Peter, I'm sure, in and around joining us in the studio as and when we get further updates regarding this awful incident that's taken place in Liverpool city centre. And again, our thoughts, our prayers go to the victims, their families and their loved ones at this dreadful time. We are grateful to Merseyside Police for the very quick confirmation of the action that they've taken in relation to the arrest, and we will now obviously await further updates. And before we go to the break, Peter, sorry,
just many other political leaders reacting to this. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, shocked by the scenes in Liverpool today. I want to thank the emergency services who have responded so quickly. My thoughts are with all of those who have been injured or affected.
Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, so again, we'll keep people updated as and when the story goes on. Remember, if you want to join the show to talk about what else we've discussed that's not related to the incident in Liverpool, you can call us on 0344 499 1000. You can text in the word talk at the start of your message to 87222, or you can follow us and message us on X at talkTV. When we come back, we will be going on to talking about Sir Keir Starmer and his potential U-turn when it came to the budget of £5 billion, both on winter fuel and on the two-job benefit cap, with the Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator, Mr James Hill. Please, as I say, 0344 499 1000, text the word talk to 87222 and message us on X at talkTV. We'll see you shortly after this break, and thank you for your patience so far this evening.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week, the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humsy Useless is now spending his time.
There goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar.
Hello,
and
lady.
unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back here to Talk. We're on the Political Asylum with me, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan. We've got through the first hour. We're now on to our second. I'm delighted to have in the studio with me the superb, the excellent Matthew Talbot, former Labour advisor, giving his views and opinions and quite shockingly and unexpectedly for Matthew, able to actually give us eyewitness account on what the scene is currently in and around Liverpool due to his partner having been at the parade, and we're grateful for him so kindly sharing some of that information. But of course, I would remind everyone that we will give you updates as and when they come in. We have had confirmation in the last 15 minutes that a 53-year-old white British male has been arrested following the incident where a vehicle has hit pedestrians and bystanders in Liverpool city centre on Water Street, and we will keep you updated as and when we get more information. The Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have both said that they are across it, and Merseyside Police have obviously given that important update regarding an arrest having been made. We now move to back on track with where we were with the show, which is to discuss the very important political discussion of the day, which is about Sir Keir Starmer and what's going on within the Labour Party. We have had the speculation that he is about to push forward for a scrapping of the two-child benefit cap, something that he seems to be at odds with his own current Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, as well as obviously having announced earlier in the week that there was going to be some kind of U-turn without providing any detail when it came to winter fuel payments. And to discuss this, I'm delighted to say that we're joined down the line by the Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator, a good friend of the show, Mr. James Hill. James, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you, John. Thanks for asking me on.
No, we're delighted to have you on, James. Now, look, you would have heard maybe me speaking with James Starkie, pointing out the polling that says that Labour now is on average polling at 23% for the month of May. The largest drop in opinion polls for a government in 40 years, as bad as what it was when Brown in 2009 dealt with the outcome of the economic crash, as bad as it was in the final months leading up to that 2019 general election for Jeremy Corbyn. The biggest drop on issues being around health, housing and the economy. And then if I give you more, James, to set the scene, I'm sure you'll then be able to go further. We've got this U-turn that's potentially going to cost £5 billion. £5 billion credibility now blown away. Let's not forget Lucy Powell actually told us there'll be a run on the pound if Labour hadn't scrapped the winter fuel payment. I will put that down as a gaffe rather than as an actual government position. We've also got a potential £60 billion deficit, if economists are to believe, for Rachel Reeves to face. £2 to £3 billion in public sector pay rises year on year, which because of the above inflation pay rises. 6.25 million patients still on waiting lists. 170 rebels on disability benefit cuts, and £20 billion worth of borrowing in the month of April, the fourth largest on record. James, what on earth is going on? Is Sir Keir Starmer spending £5 billion of political capital in the right way?
Well, he's keeping his party happy, and whether that actually will translate to electoral success remains to be seen. I mean, look, Jonathan, this is the problem right now is two things. One of which is that in terms of getting spending cuts through Parliament, this has proven to be, as you'll remember from Liz Truss's time, a really difficult shift in the public's imagination over the past sort of 5-10 years or so. It is increasingly hard to get state spending back to levels we used to see. As a result of that, on welfare, for instance, the Labour Party is very jittery about that. I was at the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting last week, and at that meeting it was clear that one of the big issues they were concerned about wasn't the sort of EU reset. It was, of course, these £5 billion of welfare cuts that are expected next month. The second thing, of course, is not just in Parliament, it's also about the public too. 30 years ago, John Major could stand up and talk about inflation and the ERM and say that if it ain't hurting, it isn't working. Right now, unfortunately, for every politician, the voters' pain threshold has got much lower, and they're therefore unwilling to sort of suck up a lot of the pain that comes with spending cuts, and unwilling to say when we're going to wait it out and wait for they want instant gratification right now. And as a result of that, Jonathan, it means that it's very hard for politicians to take big long-term decisions without it coming back to haunt them in the short to medium term.
Well, James Starkie, again, former government special advisor under the Conservatives for both Priti Patel and Michael Gove, he was saying that Labour's kind of made some very good long-term decisions, NHS England being scrapped, for example. Angela Rayner seemingly actually approving a lot of large developments. That big announcement, obviously, of a new theme park coming in, I think it was in Berkshire, maybe wrong, apologies if I've got the wrong county there. We've also got, obviously, Heathrow third runway approved. Yes, unpopular maybe in the short term, but long-term should come with economic benefits too. But the government doesn't seem to be getting any credit for that. And is the problem that actually Sir Keir Starmer is the biggest problem of all? That ultimately a lot of promises were made. We've got a lot of video footage of him saying things around immigration in 2020 that he's certainly not saying now when he's talking about an island of strangers in 2025. Is it a credibility issue with Sir Keir Starmer personally that's making it hard for Labour to win the battle of getting their message across?
Yeah, I think it's credibility, I think it's consistency. And the problem is, for instance, the government likes to say that it's a government of growth, but then, of course, it then introduces a budget where there's £35 billion in tax increases. They talk about being on the side of business, and yet, for instance, they have the national insurance hike. So the public, which sort of doesn't have as much attention as we do in Westminster, it gets these confused messages bombarding them, talking on the one hand about net zero, on the other hand about Heathrow. And I do think there's been a failure of purpose in the first 11 months to explain who exactly this Labour government is going to be serving, what are their voting coalition going to look like, and are they actually the master of events or merely beholden to them? So I think it's no surprise that you now see Labour on around 22% of the polls. A lot of MPs are saying privately, what are our values? Who do we stand for? What are we representing? And that's why I think you've now seen these quite desperate decisions on welfare, which come primarily, in my opinion, due to party management and internal party discord, rather than actually some long-term strategy. They're doing some good things, but unfortunately for Labour, they're being outweighed by other stuff they're doing as well.
Do you think Labour have bizarrely not learned the lessons of the Conservatives? In that last 5 years, which I was a part of, there were multiple groups. We know we've got the Labour Growth Group, we've got the Red Wall Group, there's, I think, other groups too that exist within the Parliamentary Labour Party, all putting out press statements, all putting out views, all sending out letters, getting colleagues signing up. They seem to, when they first came in, I thought Labour were going to be very disciplined. And actually they did initially out the gates, especially around winter fuel initially, were very disciplined. But it seems to have disintegrated exceptionally quickly. And it appears to me that they're on a trajectory to basically eventually see someone's going to have to go. And it feels to me the most obvious person is going to be Rachel Reeves, the person who was the one who implemented these tax rises or implemented these welfare cuts or implemented this scrapping winter fuel payment. She must be feeling pretty bruised by Sir Keir Starmer saying that he's going to U-turn after she was so diligently holding the government line and doing his bidding, no?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, she was seen as integral at the beginning of this government. Very much she was given all the weapons, the controls of economic policy. And yet now what we see is sort of much promises growth hasn't materialised. There's been a confused messaging on the economy. And you mentioned winter fuel. Never lead your troops into a battle you don't think you can win. And what Labour MPs are quite furious about is the fact that they were led up this hill. They spent 10 months defending this policy, saying it was right we took away all these millions from people who didn't need it. 1 in 5 pensioners are millionaires, according to statistics. But now they've had to U-turn on it. And so it's a bit like her credibility is shot, and they haven't made the savings they were going to. You could have had a much more ambitious scheme, for instance, maybe changing the triple lock to a dual lock, maybe enacting more radical planning reform quicker. I mean, that would also cause an upset. By doing it for so little economic gain and inflicting maximum political pain, it's no surprise that I think Rachel Reeves' future is a lot less assured than it was 12 months ago.
We get told that the winter fuel U-turn, and again, we have no details of what this U-turn will even look like, and again, that seems to be short-sighted because now there's another vacuum about what does the U-turn even constitute. But there was some hope, as we saw in some papers, suggesting that some focus groups have said that if you U-turn, the public will be forgiving. As someone who has been there and lived with the bruises, I didn't think the public did, but maybe I'm wrong, James. Do you think the public will forgive if Sir Keir Starmer's bold enough in the autumn budget to say, we're doing a full U-turn on winter fuel, don't worry, and we're sorry we got it wrong?
I think you can get through a U-turn if it's done quickly and cleanly and the public move on. And you almost go, look over here, there's something shiny. And I think, the great sort of, was it greased piglet, Boris Johnson was brilliant at that, sort of getting loose of every trouble. The key thing is about orders of magnitude. And eventually the thing he couldn't U-turn on was about sort of, COVID and Partygate and all of that stuff. But in terms of Labour, I think they can move on from winter fuel. And of course, people are calling it its poll tax moment. Now, the good side for Labour, from that perspective, is this. Of course, Margaret Thatcher introduced the poll tax and she went, but a year later the Tories scrapped it and they won re-election, a historic 4th term. Labour can come back from this. They are certainly by no means out of the 2029 election. They really can have a path to victory. The key thing is stop making the mistakes. And unfortunately for the country, Jonathan, all too often with the tax rises, whether it's on private schools, whether it's on the family farms tax, whether it's going to be on the winter fuel savings, these economic decisions don't seem to be fully costed. They're not yielding the millions the government say they're going to, and it seems that they're learning from experience. It's a painful lesson both for them and for the country as well.
You'd imagine this budget is going to be quite extraordinary in the autumn. I mean, Rachel Reeves, as we say, some economists suggesting that it could be a £60 billion deficit that she's got to overcome. We obviously haven't seen the numbers yet of what the impact of increasing national insurance and employers has done to employment. We haven't yet seen what the impact of the tariffs from Donald Trump has done, not just to our economy, but the global economy too. So those are yet to come through and be seen. We know house building is actually slowing down. I think, in fact, since the 1st of January 2025, 23 of the 33 London boroughs have not built a single, or started to even build, a single new home. Building homes, getting down the NHS waiting lists, growing the economy were 3 very big, clear promises from this Labour government. And so far, they'd have to be given an F, wouldn't they, on their homework?
Yeah, certainly. I think that the NHS is probably the best in terms of, good news stories. But also, more broadly, Jonathan, there was, of course, that infamous list published by Sue Gray of things that needed to be fixed. There were 6 items on it, and they included sort of crumbling schools, jails in disrepute. And I think that actually what we're seeing is an inability to fix the public services. Now, I would fully accept they're in a very difficult situation and have all sympathy with those involved. But the key point in all of this is going to be about sort of getting that narrative across and explaining what they're going to be doing. And right now, I think there's a failure to get the basics of economic growth right. And if you can't get that one single thing fixed, the money that comes in to fix the public services will not simply materialise, and Labour will struggle in that case to win re-election next time around.
Now, James, there was a great piece in The Spectator from one of your colleagues saying about reform is actually now left-wing. They are trying to outflank Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party by saying that they would fully reintroduce the winter fuel payments and they would also scrap the 2-child cap benefit too. Now, to be fair to Nigel Farage, it has been a long-term position, I believe, his on the 2-child cap that he would scrap it. Do you think this is going to cause a problem for reform? We know that it's polling unpopular within their own voter base. In fact, polling suggests that 10 to 15% more people think it should be kept in place rather than scrapped. But interestingly, James, Luke Trill from More in Common, I just thought I'd share this with you, said something which I know as a political historian like yourself you'll quite like. He said that if you do the Tony Blair test of the 3-second, 30-second, 3-minute rule, on the 3-second test, which is should we scrap the 2-child benefit cap, the public will always go no, you should only have as many children as you can afford. But once you get to the 30-second, they do go, well, no child should be left in poverty. And then once you get to the 3-minute, it should be, well, we should be eliminating child poverty. If Reform UK are smart and frame the argument about this being about tackling child poverty, can they get away with it? Or is this going to start costing them when they keep pushing their own voter base to adopt policies that, quite frankly, they're not interested in?
I think they can get away with it in that they are framing it as an issue of trade-offs, and they're saying that, look, we're going to have the spending on a big welfare state for our citizens and not have it one for the rest of the world. So, i.e. by that, we're going to use the money that comes from hotels for illegal asylum seekers and on net zero commitments as well. Now, I'm a bit sceptical on the former because they talk about sort of foreign aid and breaking foreign aid about spending it on the two-child benefit cap. Actually, foreign aid, of course, as you'll know, Jonathan, a lot of that was raided earlier this year to pay for the defence uplift. Also, a lot of it is paying for existing hotels for those asylum seekers. Now, obviously, you can argue maybe Reform are going to pull out of every asylum agreement we've signed up to, but that will take a lot of time. So, I mean, first of all, there's an issue around timing on this. The second thing is about economic credibility, because, of course, we all remember Liz Truss. We all remember the lines that the Tories are trying to use as Liz Truss on steroids. Reform will have to get their costings right in all this, because if they don't, given how much they claim to be the sort of responsible party of government and have the right to be treated like grown-ups, that could come back to bite them. So I do think they're going to have a look at the figures. They say they want to be taken seriously. They say they want the privileges that come with being a major party. They're going to have to take it with the responsibilities that come with it too.
Because I'm quite interested with the fact that Richard Tice was very early on to say that Reform would institute £90 billion worth of personal and business tax cuts within the first 100 days. Now, the language appears to be changing, I think, to something that this is now an ambition of Reform UK. How does Reform UK straddle Richard Tice and Nigel Farage's natural, Thatcherite, low tax, small state, pro-free market, aka a US trade deal that would allow chlorinated chicken and hormone beef into the UK at the cost of UK British farming, let's be personally frank? How are they straddling that beast while also being the party that's saying that we would also help those on welfare, which to most voters who would say, what about helping those who are in work? For example, the Conservatives would say, like Ranil Jadwara has before when he was a Member of Parliament in the last Parliament, why not allow the marriage allowance to be a personal tax allowance, fully transferable, so that way families or loved ones and married ones can actually make a decision? Why not help taxpayers rather than people who they would claim are just takers?
Yeah, they absolutely need to get this right. And I think the way to do it potentially is by not looking at cutting back existing services so much as abolishing the state's responsibility for certain areas. So, for instance, as I say, looking at the net zero commitments, a lot of the money that goes there, rather than sort of just saying sort of austerity redux 2.0, where you say, OK, we're going to restrict the MOJ's budget for 10% year on year. What you do is, should the state be actually providing some of these services? Should they be looking at, things about net zero, for instance? The other thing that, for instance, Zia Youssef is very keen on is about procurement and the existing government contracts. And I do think there's a lot of waste there. The Ministry of Defence, of course, most infamously, there's things like the IX tank contract, where it made the riders of the tanks sick. Inflicting more pain on our side rather than their side. Things like that can be looked at. And also, I do think there are questions around sort of, some of the things around civil service culture as well. But I do agree, Jonathan, it's going to be a really hard one to circle. Now, they can come back and say the two main parties have had, decades in office. Look at the national debt. It's gone up to sort of 2 trillion or something like that. But I would say that I think they need to at least come up with a credible answer to this. And I do think the age of sort of massive tax cuts does seem to be on its way out. I don't think we're going to see a sort of libertarian paradise if Reform gets into government. What we will see is a focus on wastage and a way in which they want to roll back the commitments that the state has in certain areas like energy and also in areas like procurement too.
And final one from me, James, I couldn't help but tease you on this. Is Kemi Badenoch a dead duck? Or are we just simply waiting for the return of Boris Johnson?
I think there's more life in Kemi Badenoch's chance of leadership than there are in Boris Johnson's. I'll say that. I think there's I think Kemi's a fighter, so I think that we'll wait to see. But I certainly think we're expecting this duck to start flying soon because I think the members aren't getting too happy at how things are going right now.
Would you love to see a by-election of Boris Johnson versus, let's be frank, Nigel Farage? Wouldn't that just be a Westminster insider's dream?
Oh, that would be my Christmas, Hanukkah, Easter all rolled into one, Jonathan. I'd be first there. And I can't even imagine what the seat would look like. The characters involved, big egos, big personalities. It'll almost be like a sort of mini presidential contest boiled down to one constituency. I would love it.
I've got to admit, it'll be quite tough for even Keir Starmer with the trappings of the Office of the Prime Minister to get any cut through in that kind of by-election. James Hill, Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator, thank you so much for joining us. We will chat with Matthew Torbett to get his views on all that we just discussed there after the break. Remember, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK to start your message to 87222 and at talkTV. Oh, sorry, apologies. I've just been told in my ear that we've got Nick Ellaby, back with us on the line. Hey, Nick, sorry, how are you?
Good evening. Yeah, I mean, I'm fine. The thoughts here in the city centre of Liverpool are turning to the victims of this horrific collision. What we do know now, since I last spoke to you, is that Merseyside police have arrested a 53-year-old white man at the scene after a car was seen driving into a number of pedestrians here on, it was actually on Water Street. I'm on Dale Street at the moment in the centre of Liverpool, very close to the docks. The Liver building is just at the end of this road, and actually everybody was here. We think around 1 million people on the streets of Liverpool celebrating Liverpool Football Club's Premier League trophy and the huge parade today. And that's what I was here to report on. And then shockingly at around 7 p.m. we had this news that filtered through the crowds, actually, obviously everyone's got a phone on them, haven't they? But everybody was talking about it as I made my way back here to the scene. And actually still on this street, dozens, hundreds probably of people still enjoying themselves in the bars and the pubs around here. But the feeling of tension and anger is palpable. And I think the police were very, very quick to release the information about the man that they arrested because, one, they've already told people not to share any disinformation online. And two, just to clear up any speculation as to the, let's say, ethnicity, the background of the attacker. But Merseyside police, as I say, have arrested a 53-year-old white man who is from the Liverpool area. And just after I arrived here, Jonathan, I saw 6 officers holding a middle-aged, bald white man at the back of a police van, holding a backpack that was presumably his, and patting the guy down before putting him in the van and leading him away. There are still a huge number of emergency vehicles on the scene. There were 4 or 5 St John's ambulances when I arrived, and there were 3 Northwest ambulances. There were fire crews, a fire engine on this street, a huge number of police vehicles. There's still around 30 or 40 police I can see here in the street, and a lot of people making their way back from the parade today. That was supposed to be it was a huge celebration in the city of Liverpool. Fantastic day, but it's just turned so sour.
No, absolutely. We've had Natasha Rinaldi, one eyewitness, who was watching Liverpool FC parade from her friend's living room when the incident occurred, say, we could hear screams. It was a horrible scene. Some speaking to the PA news agency, she also said it was so loud, people screamed, it sounded desperate. And then we looked out the window and we saw a car had run over people. We could just hear screams and screams. We were very confused. Some of my friends were down there and the car was so near them. It was a horrible scene nobody was expecting. And what's the feeling on the ground amongst the general public that you've come across so far, Nick?
Well, first of all, anger. I mean, there were a small number of news crews here. There's a few newspaper journalists, a couple of TV crews, radio crews as well, alongside me, and then 1 or 2 other people that you're not quite sure if they are journalists or just broadcasting online, and a real sense of anger among a large number of local people here who were upset that people had their phones out, actually quite illustrative of how far journalist stock has fallen in people's minds around the country, because I actually was abused by a couple of members of the public. I tried to explain to them, I showed them my press card, I said, I'm just here to report on the incident, as I've been doing all day with the parade. But huge amount of anger, and I think, the police were right to release that information as quickly as possible about the attacker, but we still don't know how many people have been injured, what condition those people are in. I know that an air ambulance arrived here in the city centre shortly after. There were huge numbers of ambulances on the scene, and our thoughts go out to the victims and their families.
Absolutely. Just to reiterate what you said there, Nick, our thoughts and prayers here, both at Talk and the whole of News UK, go out to the victims, their families, their friends and their loved ones at this horrific and awful time, as well as to the city of Liverpool, who, as you say, were meant to be enjoying a day of celebration. Have we had any estimation on how many people were in the city centre at this time? Some reports up to 1 million people. Do we have any indication? And have we heard anything from Liverpool Football Club at this time either?
So yes, Liverpool Football Club have posted online to say that their condolences are with the victims. They're shocked and saddened by what they've seen. They've posted very, very quickly. In terms of the number of people on the streets, I think 1 million sounds about right. There were 750,000 on the streets here in 2019 when they had a parade for Liverpool winning the Champions League. The people here on the street that were there then told me they felt like there were more today. The numbers of people here were unbelievable. My train couldn't make the last 2 stops at Crewe and Runcorn because the train was bulging. There were hundreds of people on the platforms of all the stations we came through. And actually, I couldn't get a train out. I was actually late getting out of Liverpool. I'm still here because we couldn't get into the station on the way out after the parade because of the huge numbers of people that were here. And there are still a lot of people in the bars and in the streets that were celebrating, and now a lot fewer celebrating because of the terrible news.
And Nick, final one from me so far. Do we have, as you say, we haven't had any indication on the status or on the amount of people that have been injured. Have we heard from any family members, or are there any family members around who may have had loved ones caught up in this incident that you've been able to speak to so far?
So I've been on the street doing reports into you and Talk Sport and Times Radio. I haven't had much chance to speak to people. The only people I've spoken to who were able to see the incident, again, like you said, just talked about the huge numbers of people that were on the street, the screams that they heard, and also the panic and that feeling of anger that there were a huge number of people that enveloped the car as soon as it ran into. I mean, it ran into quite a large number of people, Jonathan. So, but apart from, in terms of victims' families, no, I haven't managed to speak to any yet.
Well, Nick, can I just ask that and hope that you keep safe? And can I remind anyone that's in and around the area that may be watching this, journalists are there to report the news. Nick is doing his job to bring us the latest updates. As a member of the press, he has the ability to directly engage with Merseyside Police, as well as North West Ambulance Service, Liverpool City Council, Liverpool Football Club, Kim Johnson, the MP whose area this covers. And this is not the time to shrill, to shout down, to intimidate journalists who are simply trying to do their job, which is bringing us this very important news to understand how this awful incident has happened, and most importantly at this moment in time, understand where victims are. So Nick, I hope that you are safe and you are well as you do your job in reporting on this horrific incident. Thank you for joining us, and we will be back again, I'm sure, with you for further updates later on. Matthew, obviously, your partner is in Liverpool. Have you had any further updates about how she is at this moment in time?
Yeah, the station's closed. Nobody can get out. Fortunately, she's got a friend that lives in Liverpool who's picked her up. I think anybody heading south at this point isn't getting back. She's going to stay in Stoke overnight at a friend's and then likely come back tomorrow. But from what she said, there seems to have been unsavoury behaviour at the station, which has caused a closure there. I think not linked to this or anything otherwise, but I think police are just trying to be very wary of an ongoing situation. So, it's just a bit of a nightmare if you're up there at the minute.
Well, just as a reminder before we go to the break, a 53-year-old white British male from the Merseyside area has been formally arrested by Merseyside police. That we are aware that, of course, there are victims, but we are not sure of how many victims there are, nor are we aware at this moment in time of the status of those. But we here at Talk send our thoughts and our prayers to them, their loved ones, their family members at this dreadful time. Please make sure you call in 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK at the start of your message to 87222 and follow us and message us on Talk at talkTV. We'll see you shortly.
I can't afford it. I mean, that's £3.5 billion a year, I think, to scrap that. And, you know, the public finances are already in total mess. I mean, I think the deficit this year is something like £160 billion. It would have been 110 billion. Well, it was 110 billion forecast to be when Rachel Reeves took over. She's already taxing and spending phenomenal amounts of money. She just can't afford it. The taxpayer can't afford it.
What would you do about the winter fuel allowance?
We'll reverse it. We've already said we would.
I know a couple of backbench Labour MPs and a couple of junior minister Labour MPs who I was very good friends with who worked in the party, a couple of whom worked part-time for the party, part-time in the supermarket before the general election, right? These people got into politics because they wanted to make a difference and they wanted to help, as most people do in politics. And they got there on these beliefs, these core beliefs that they thought were shared by the leadership of their party. And then they were asked to vote and support for things that were completely
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back with me, Jonathan Gullis, here on Talk, the political asylum and the home of common sense. I'm joined in the studio by former Labour advisor Matthew Torbett, who's been doing an amazing job of updating us on what's going on in Liverpool, although tragically, obviously, with his partner being there, but thankfully she is safe. But I'm also now joined in the studio by ex-Scotland Yard detective Mike Neville, who's also, we've got a lot of Stoke connections going on here today, also a Stoke-on-Trent resident. First of all, Mike, thank you for joining us. And we're keen, because we're obviously talking about what's happening in Liverpool, to get an understanding about what's happening in terms of a policing situation. What would be the decisions undergoing right now? Interesting that the police have been very quick to tell us an arrest has been made and give us details as much as they can at this stage of what the Mail certainly looks like in order to try and counter any disinformation.
I think that's the key issue here. I think lessons have been really learned, Jonathan, from the Southport, you know, because if there's a void left, I found this with press departments and the police, they would not release information, and that just creates a void. We saw the disaster of what occurred there. Remember the Nicola Bulley thing, all the misinformation there, and even worse with Southport, with the riots and the like, because that void was filled. So I think that's number one. So the press department are getting that right. Merseyside police are getting that right. Of course, by now they'll have established a command structure. They'll have a gold officer who will be somebody of assistant chief constable rank, somebody of silver who will be a superintendent or detective superintendent, and then officers on the ground who form the bronze teams, gathering CCTV, finding out witnesses, and so a whole inquiry will now be being formed, where there be, you know, things like the CCTV evidence, all the witnesses, people with mobile phones, all that. You've seen all the stuff already on social media, so that's critical evidence that they'll have to be gathered. Let's pray that there's no one died, but if there is, that will be for the coroner's inquest and for any criminal proceedings. But the man is in custody, so the police are only so many hours, you know, a maximum of, you know, 72, maybe 90 or more hours to investigate that, to charge that man. But they've got...
Let's go from arrest to charge.
They have to go to arrest to charge. So, and they'll be looking at all the critical evidence that they can gather to show in the interview to make sure the man can comment on that. But I think, firstly, the key thing is the press, and that gold command officer will be really directing that, and then the operational investigation will be left to somebody like a detective superintendent.
Now, out of interest, and again, this is not to cause speculation online, but I'm assuming with an incident of this type, there would be normal for counter-terror type policing to be looking at this from the initially to determine whether or not they believe this to be anything terror related. I'm assuming the individual they'll now have in custody, that home of that individual will now be probably most likely have had the doors going through sometime soon, and a full investigation into
what
you've
got to imagine now, there's not, so that if they know the man, they'll have details. There's all the intelligence checks that they can do in the police station. Has he been arrested before? What's his grievance? What's his motivation for committing this wickedness? But also in everybody's house, everybody has mobile phones, computers, and they often, you know, have a massive information. What has he been searching for? What's brought this? Is the man? It will also be doing checks on with these doctors and medical staff. Is he some way involved? Is there mental health issues here? All these areas will be probed: terrorism, mental health, some form form of grievance. But as I say, the world is so digital now. On that computer that somebody has, on that mobile phone, may be that key piece of evidence that gives us the rationale for this wicked incident.
And we've heard from Matthew that at the station there's been some quite unsavoury scenes, eyewitnesses saying that behaviour hasn't been great. I'm assuming with something like this, again, it would be normal that if the police felt need to, they would shut down public transport, such as access to a railway station, in order to contain as much as they can and determine that this is an individual acting alone rather than others potentially being willing still to take further action.
And it may be, let's say, for example, we've had tragedies where people have had a heart attack at the wheel. We don't know what's the motivation, what's the reason for it here. But one of the key aims of the police is, it's an old-fashioned phrase, but to keep the king's peace. And so they don't want any trouble there. That's why the stopping station, keeping the area clear, one, to gather evidence, and also to stop any violence, because people will be angry. You know, they'll have seen their loved ones hurt. You know, they'll be harking back to the tragedies of things like Hillsborough, and it is just an awful thing. So the police the uniformed officers will be calming that down. That'll be part of the task. The detective officers will be gathering the evidence that's come in, and then you will have people like counter-terrorism and intelligence officers who are gathering all that information either online or through raiding the home, seeing what's on the computers, phones, and seeing what we know about this character.
And how difficult is that, like you say, from probably past experience or certainly knowing officers on the ground still? What is it like to try and police a scene like this? You know, like you say, where you've got the press turning up wanting answers, the public themselves wanting answers or to express their anger and upset, loved ones that need to be informed if they've got anyone who's a victim, of course a victim being someone who could just be injured, let alone, God forbid, the worst case scenario where someone may have tragically lost life. And again, we've had no news about the victims. We have no indication of what the status is of those who have been tragically caught up in this. But again, how difficult is it to deal with all that? I'm assuming this will be the entirety of Merseyside Police essentially descending on this.
And they can also call an assistant. What you can imagine, you've got that gold commander, then there's on the ground that silver commander, detective superintendent, or the like. Then underneath that is various teams, an inspector in charge of what's called bronze units, intelligence, family liaison, gathering CCTV evidence. Somebody will be policing the streets. They'll have the equivalent, the Met's territorial support group, making sure that's there. So there'll be individual teams led by an inspector. So there's a real structure around this, you know. And when the police in this country are professional, they really do deliver a good job. And again, press liaison will be one of those key roles, but there'll be a inspector rank in charge making sure that these things happen.
And obviously we know that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary are being kept updated on this. Who would normally be the one feeding into our leaders in terms of political leaders what they're getting on the ground? Would that be from Gold Command, or would that be from...
or even the Chief Constable? I'm sure the Chief Constable will be in the office tonight. The Gold Commander will be appointed, because this inquiry is going to go on for months, literally. So that Gold Commander will keep charge. But I would not doubt that the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner, the elected Police and Crime Commissioner, are in the headquarters of Merseyside Police right now and are briefing the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary.
Well, just to remind listeners again, and thank you so much, Mike, for sharing that intelligence and understanding what's going on, that a 53-year-old white British male from the Merseyside area has been arrested, not yet charged, as Mike said. An investigation, of course, is now underway. We've had many statements from many different people. The latest one here from Liverpool Football Club, who obviously were meant to be celebrating their 20th league title, and they have said, we are in direct contact with Merseyside Police regarding the incident on Water Street, which happened towards the end of the trophy parade earlier this evening. Our thoughts and our prayers are with those who have been affected by the serious incident. We will continue to offer our full support to the emergency services and local authorities who are dealing with this incident. It is a horrible thing to have happened. Again, everyone here at Talk is praying for the loved ones, for the victims and for the family members all involved, and we hope that we can get to a resolution in terms of knowing where victims are and their current status as soon as we can. And to remind everyone, the Prime Minister has also said that the scenes in Liverpool are appalling. My thoughts are with all those who are injured or affected, adding that he was, and I quote, being kept updated on developments, and asked that we give the police the space they need to investigate. We'll come back after the break.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back with me, Jonathan Gullis, here on the home of common sense. That is Talk. I'm standing in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on the political asylum. In the studio, I have Matthew Talbot, who's been doing an amazing job of dipping and diving with me in between the terrible incident we've had in Liverpool, alongside, obviously, the actual news that we wanted to discuss as well today. We've had a couple of texts come in, I think quite interesting ones that have come in too. So Zarina has said, Jonathan, have the stories not learnt anything? Boris, like many of the ex-leaders, was hopeless. The country should have stuck behind Rishi, but Boris and his chums made sure that the Tories were taken into oblivion. An interesting take there. Another one from Stephen McMillan. Jonathan, only the politicos want Farage versus Johnson. The country wants anyone who will put us, the people, first, not indulge their politics. Steve from Bromsgrove, thank you very much for your message. Another one come in. Labour had 15 years in opposition to come up with policies and hit the ground running that went well for them so far, I don't think. The Reform Party has 4 years to develop their plans and policies, and let's be perfectly honest, the bar isn't very high, is it? That's from Brian. And then another one here from Steve again. Raise the tax thresholds for pensioners only from $12,750 to, say, $14,000. Add winter fuel allowance into income for pensioners so those paying tax pay some of it back. Matthew, it's been a time, isn't it? We've got, over this weekend, Angela Rayner allegedly on manoeuvres. Keir Starmer's polling going from bad to worse and now announcing U-turns. We've got lots of stories about Kemi Badenoch. It's not about if she'll go, it's about when she'll go, and whether the big blonde bombshell is Boris Johnson might come out of retirement. So we'll start over here first of all. Keir Starmer's U-turn on winter fuel, again, no details, but coming, and allegedly going to force through a change on the two-child benefit cap, putting him in direct contact with Morgan McSweeney, who I know you've not held back on before in terms of his leadership. Is this the beginning of the end for Keir Starmer? Is this going to save him and turn the polling around for him?
No, I think James Heal hinted at it. He said, U-turns can be good if they're done quite quickly, and that was always my view. When this was rumoured and then also announced in the newspapers that they were going to cut the winter fuel allowance, my hopeful logic, which I think I spoke about on here as well, was at the budget, last autumn budget, rather than a policy rabbit out of the hat, what Rachel Reeves would have been best doing is seeing the uproar that was quite clearly coming over this sort of policy, read the room and gone, I'm not going to pull a policy, but my rabbit out of the hat is going to be, look, we're a government that listens. We thought about doing this and we're not going to do it. And I think that sort of U-turn very quickly would have given them some credit with certain people. I think what this looks like to most people is quite inauthentic, and they're only really making this decision because of essentially getting battered at the ballot box last month. I think because of that, it's far too late for them to gain any sort of electoral credibility, and whether it will change people's minds on Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves, to be honest with you.
Do you support Nigel Farage, who's coming out the gates quick on this two-child benefit cap? Do you think he's right that we should be scrapping that? Would it be wiser, Keir Starmer, to get behind that as an agenda?
Yes, I think to nullify the threat of Nigel and the idea that he can no doubt tout around, I called for this and he's now done it. We are basically the government. I seem to remember Labour doing a couple of things similar when Boris was Prime Minister, and a couple of U-turns he made, either during COVID or post-COVID. It was that thing of, they're just listening to us, and you look a little bit weak and impotent. I also think, the support, there's certain levels of support for the two-child cap. And the idea, I think, that he's bandied around is that people, just have kids that can't afford them. And there has to be an element of personal responsibility. I get that. And anecdotally, my mum and dad had 4 kids. 2 of them were a surprise. There was, an element of personal responsibility that maybe should have gone there. They never claimed a penny in benefits. They worked hard. And I suppose as a safety net aspect, what if you were to have 3 kids and you could afford them, and then you end up made redundant somewhere down the line? Should the child be punished for that? So I don't know. But from an electoral point of view, he should. But I think James Starkie said it. These backbenchers will now go, we can get more. And I've had meetings with many MPs trying to plot this sort of stuff. There is an idea that even if it's too late electorally for these changes to be made, it's a good thing because we might get more out of them. And that would be my hope. I hope we do.
And you were hearing lots of stuff about Angela Rayner. Allegedly she's on manoeuvres, and then she very clearly came out the weekend on the Sunday news channels and said, I have no intention to run for the Labour leadership. I'm not interested in becoming Prime Minister. Is she genuine?
Yes.
Do you really believe her?
Yes, because she said the same to me pre-election. She's also said the same to people close to her pre-election. So nothing has changed in the fact that it's exactly the same answer she's always given. I will tell you why I think Angela will absolutely not run unless she's almost forced to by people around her, because the most important thing to Angela Rayner is her kids and her family. The most important thing, like it is most people. And Angela has lived a life before politics. You know, there's a lot of us, you know, knew Angela before politics, and therefore she's led a fairly normal life. The stuff that Lord Ashcroft tried to dig up scared her. And when you've gone from a relatively normal-ish life, even as a politician, to people knocking on your brother's door who's a veteran of an Afghanistan war, that's not nice. And it shook her up. So the idea of even more scrutiny as a Prime Minister, she always used to say, I would never want that job, and I've never sorted it.
Well, actually, we've got a clip here of Angela Rayner making that comment on Sky News. Let's listen.
Absolutely not, and I don't want to be leader of the Labour Party. I'm very happy and honoured to do the job.
What kind of politician are you? You don't want to be leader of your party?
No, I'm very happy and honoured and to be Deputy Prime Minister of this country, and I've got a lot in my in tray to prove that I can do the job that I'm doing and deliver on the milestones for the people of this country. That's what I'm interested in, Trevor.
You know this is being recorded, don't you? Because actually, that means one day, if you do, somebody's going to play it back to you.
Absolutely. I'll be happy for you to play it back to me. I have no desire to go for the leadership of the Labour Party. My desire is to deliver for the people of this country who have given me opportunities beyond what I could have dreamed of.
Well, very clear there from Angela Rayner, not mincing her words and even acknowledging that this could end up haunting her. And actually, I think to be that blunt is quite rare. She didn't leave herself any wiggle room. She was happy to use the words the presenters wanted her to use. So we will see what happens there. Matthew, obviously I mentioned to James Hill there that Rachel Reeves might now have to fall victim. Do you think her credibility is now gone? Because ultimately Keir Starmer has decided to undermine her by reversing on the winter fuel payments, undermining her by potentially scrapping the two-child benefit cap. This leaves her shot, doesn't it? You know, she's already got a £60 billion deficit allegedly to sort out. Now she's got another £5 billion that she's got to find money for somewhere.
Yes, well, I was always of the opinion, and I think I'd said it to you previously, that Keir would go next year. We'll lose Wales and Scotland, and the pressure will become unsurmountable. I had forgotten to factor in how ruthless Keir is, even to those closest to him. And if he needs someone to go in order for him to survive, it's going to be her. And at that point, no doubt the fiscal rules will get junked. Somebody will have to be put in, and they'll have to go hell for leather, maybe borrowing to invest before the next election to try and have an impact, a material impact in people's lives, to be trusted to maybe do something at the next election. From what newspaper reports I read over the weekend, she's planning to junk her fiscal rules, which may buy her some time. I don't think she'll be happy because she's junking them because she's been forced into a position through the rumoured watering down of the welfare reforms and of the winter fuel allowance. That also told me, if you read in between the lines, she's not really been briefed that this decision's coming. So she's been caught on the hoof and is now trying to find a way to find that money, which would also suggest why there hasn't been an announcement yet and they're on about it being at a fiscal event, because she didn't know. That's what it tells me, and I might be wrong on that, but I think the way Keir may survive is ensuring that his Chancellor goes. She's less popular than him by all polling.
And what do you think about this whole potential, well, this alleged argument between Morgan McSweeney, who's saying that we should keep the two-child benefit cap, and Keir Starmer, who's saying we need to scrap it? Was this inevitable? Were there tensions always going to arise? Because Morgan McSweeney's strategy never always felt to me like Keir Starmer's natural political instinct.
No, and listen, those briefings, that's the beginning of the end for that relationship. If you're allowing, no matter who's briefed it, for that sort of stuff to be going out, somebody's directly undermining the other, and I have a feeling it isn't Keir Starmer, who, you know, doesn't really like this sort of stuff, we're led to believe. Morgan McSweeney is a deeply factional character, and Keir Starmer is an empty vessel. And Morgan identified Keir as an empty vessel that could be used to kill the left of the Labour Party in opposition. They did not want the idea of another Jeremy Corbyn ever popping up ever again. Keir got in on the back of, and listen, I have to hold my hands up, great job at totally conning the membership and essentially saying he'd be continuity Corbyn, and then getting in and just pulling the rug, going, oh, I'm not going to do any of that. And maybe Morgan had learnt from running Liz Kendall's campaign and only getting 4.5% by basically saying what Keir is saying now. We had always heard that in opposition that Morgan was secretly running Wes Streeting's shadow leadership campaign, and once Liz Truss's budget had happened, his sort of mini budget, he was a bit gutted that he appeared to be going to Downing Street, but it was 5 years early and he was going to have to do it with Keir. And even the briefings that have gone to journalist books that have come out about, inside the Labour Party and whatnot over the last 5 years, his strings will be cut as soon as he's not electorally useful, and at that point no doubt there will try and be an end to Wes or somebody else that's truly as factional as Morgan McSweeney on the sort of right of the Labour Party.
Well, a fantastic bit of insight from Matthew there. Thank you so much, Matthew. We're going to go to a quick break. Remember, 0344 499 1000 to text in. Make sure you text the word talk to 87222 and follow us and message us on X at talkTV. What do you think? Is Keir Starmer doomed? Is Rachel Reeves going to take the sacking for Keir Starmer? Or is Morgan McSweeney going to get his dream boy Wes Streeting into Downing Street? We'll come back after the break.
The politics of the past doesn't, account for what could be the future. So you've got to react. And so yesterday was a sign where she came out to say, actually, no, as a Tory party, we wouldn't abolish the two-child benefit
yes,
cap.
clear blue water.
So that's clear blue water, clear turquoise ocean between the two. So that is now something that I think people will say, OK, if it's a choice now, if we're going to have a debate about the economy, what we can afford, what we can't, you've got three different policy positions there to make voters have a choice. If there's more of that comes forward, I think you might see, can we do better in the polls.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back with me, Jonathan Gullis, on the Political Asylum, stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan between 7 and 10 p.m. today. We're going straight to our next guest because time is tight, and I want to get Kelly Jane Keane in, who's a women's rights campaigner, reacting to this incredible story that's saying that the probation staff have been told not to use the phrase chemical castration in conversations with paedophiles and sex offenders in case it upsets them. Kelly Jane, does this shock you? Kelly J, sorry, does this shock you, or does this want to make you bang your head against the proverbial brick wall?
Well, it's a bit weird, isn't it, that actually doing the eunuch making is worse than actually talking about chemical castration. It does seem to fit with the whole sort of ideology of you can do things, but you mustn't talk about them, even when it comes to castrating paedophiles.
Well, it just blew my mind, the idea that somehow we need to be worrying about upsetting paedophiles, people who are a danger to children, people who, quite frankly, I would never allow on the streets because I don't think there is a cure for paedophilia. I think that at the end of the day, the best thing we can do is keep you behind bars. And I like the fact that we've got a Labour Justice Minister saying that they're looking and exploring whether they're making this an actual mandating process, similar to what Poland, Kazakhstan and some US states do. Do you think it should be mandated that paedophiles have to chemically castrate?
No, I think there's very shoddy evidence to support that it actually stops them offending. So I don't know how much from a human rights point of view, I don't think I'm really concerned about their human rights. I personally had the police at my door for, and I quote, being untoward about paedophiles. So I'm already aware that there's some sensitivity around this incredibly vulnerable part of the population.
Is it? Can we explore that a bit more? What was it that you had allegedly said or done in order to have the police, God forbid, knock on your door? Someone who is an innocent, citizen, just giving an opinion, God forbid.
Well, I think what I'd done is on one of my many YouTube videos, is I'd said that any man that wanted to go into a space where there were little girls was a predator and probably a paedophile. And I said that I felt that any man that wants to go into spaces where there are children and where he shouldn't be is not a very nice man. And so they'd come to talk to me about that. But I think the officer had got his wires a little bit crossed and said, you were untoward about paedophiles. And I quite rightly said, I think, look, if you are going to be untoward about anyone, I think you can be quite rightly untoward about paedophiles. And he was like, I'm not here to argue. So
I literally have said to lots of friends, if this Labour government is looking for a way to get people back on board with them, saying that they're going to chemically castrate paedophiles is definitely going to be a vote winner. Albeit, like you say, let's look at the evidence of what the actual, the medicine does. But if they want to get some credibility and talk about being tough on law and order, that's certainly a way to go forward. What's your personal view on this? I mean, like you said, you're kind of sceptical about the evidence around the chemical castration. Can a paedophile be rehabilitated?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. But I don't believe anybody in a position of power in our government who isn't sort of mandating for some really harsh, serious sentences for men in possession of childhood sexual assault footage, videos and images. That they might euphemistically call pornography. So I think unless we start properly locking up these men that, you don't possess images of child sexual assault unless you are a paedophile. And I think that may be a first step into offending. So if we're not treating that really, really harshly and very, very seriously, some of those men receiving not even 1/10 of the sentence that Lucy Connolly received, then I think anything else they say is just lip service.
Well, Kelly J. King, Women's Rights Campaigner, thank you so much for joining us on this, and sorry to only have a short time with you. Matthew, quickly before we get to the break, chemical castration, good or bad?
We'll have to wait for the evidence, as boring as that sounds.
Come on, Matthew, it's good, isn't it? Just say it's good. You know it's good. You know this is good sense. The government's going to be popular if it does this. It's sensible.
Probably. I think the problem is, the first thing that came to my mind was Alan Turing, and I go, oh, well, that wasn't very good because he was chemically castrated for being gay.
This is different. This is for paedophiles.
It is, or sex offenders, and that varies. David Gork said, "Let's wait and see what the evidence is." So I'm happy to wait and see what the evidence says, and then let's go with that.
Well, make sure you call in and tell us what you think. 0344 499 1000. We'll see you shortly. Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week, the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humphrey Useless is now spending his time.
There goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar. Hello, and unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's Plank of the Week, he's got a sizable tank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the Week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back with me, Jonathan Gullis, in the final hour of our political asylum, and I'm sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan here on the home of common sense, and I'm delighted to now have Jamie McIver, Reform UK councillor, in the hot seat, taking some more. We've had Labour with Matthew, we've had Conservatives with Paul Bristow, we've had, obviously, I've been sort of trying to put forward as best I can the Labour perspective too, and now I want to get here with Jamie, because my oh my, is Reform UK all that anyone can talk about. First of all, Jamie, you had a by-election recently, I think, in your neck of the woods, and Reform won big.
Yes, we had a by-election in my actual county division, 78% Reform. Tories didn't even try, but, 78%, that is a pretty incredible result. And this is a seat that has been Labour in the past as well, but it's in a very Conservative area. But I tell you what, it was an easy campaign for us, to be perfectly honest with you. Every single door we knocked on. Of course we're Reform. It's almost people like they're offended if you begin to doubt whether they might vote Reform or not. It's like, are you joking? Of course I'm voting Reform. That was the response we had. Yeah, great campaign, great candidate, great team.
Well, fantastic. And look, I want to get into the big story, which is we're expecting a speech from Nigel Farage saying that looking to outflank Labour. And I'm quite interested, Jamie, because you were a Conservative. You've gone to Reform UK. Are you really comfortable with scrapping the two-child benefit cap? Because it was Conservative policy, and I'm sure it's something that you, like me, haven't argued against previously.
Do you know, it's actually something that has never really come across my desk, to be perfectly honest with you, Jonathan, because it's not really something that is the forefront of people I represent. They don't really talk about it much, but obviously it's been topic of debate this week. And I really understand the logic behind the policy. I understand where some Conservative critics come from. I get that, obviously, as a former Conservative. But I think, ultimately, the country's in a position where it isn't sustainable at the moment with the levels of immigration that we're having. That's the obvious. And I think, when we get to a point where we've got net zero immigration, actually one of the reasons why people try to justify immigration is this idea that we need people to keep our economy going, and we have to basically import these people. But actually the idea that we can boost our population back British families, people that live here, and to not let money be a reason not to have children, I think is a way forward. And I think actually, family, community, country, if you look at Reform's, political kind of points that we want to make, family is the first thing that comes out of our mouth. So, it makes sense to encourage people to have families.
But wouldn't it be better to have done this through tax incentives? For example, the idea of making the marriage allowance so a married couple could transfer from one partner the personal tax allowance to another partner. I think that cost around 6.1 billion. So yeah, still double what it would cost to scrap the two-child cap benefit. Wouldn't that be a better policy and get more Reform voters on side than basically Corbynism that you guys are now chasing? I mean, the Spectator is saying, the Spectator is accusing you guys of Reform is now a left-wing party, as we saw written yesterday. Is the Spectator out of touch with that?
Well, I tell you who are out of touch is all the people that say Reform is a far-right party. So if anything, I think some of these articles I'm reading is actually making me think, well, that's going to shut a few people up that try to criticise Reform. Because if you think about it logically, Reform actually, if you look at where a lot of our base support is coming from, it's coming from traditionally Labour seats. I mean, Runcorn is a great example of that. People like to say, oh, we won that election by 6 votes. No, there was 14 other thousand people that also voted for Reform in that election. So the party is appealing to people that traditionally would have voted more to the left in politics. And that's not something for the party to be in any way ashamed of. And actually, it makes me laugh when people try to criticise this policy from an ideological perspective. I think it's kind of a practical incentive to encourage people to have families and not let money be the obstacle. Because I think for too long, I hear people say all the time, how much things are costing. Of course, the cost of living is still a massive issue for people at the moment. And I think anything that we can do to encourage people to have families should be welcomed.
But I find it interesting because the polling would suggest that if you ask the direct question, people, 10 to 15% more people say they would keep the cap rather than scrap it, that people should only have children if they afford it. I've seen Adam Brooks, who I know has kind of been quite supportive of Reform, the great Essex publican that he is. He's saying...
Brilliant pub, by the way.
Brilliant pub, by the way.
Brilliant pub. Well, encourage everyone to go.
Well, he's saying this is daft. He's saying this is completely anti-Reform policy, and he's saying that, you should be doing more maybe a Hungarian French style of actually having a more positive in tax incentive system. Are you taking the base for granted? Are you going to to end up pushing? We've seen the fallout with Rupert Lowe. We've seen arguments around with Ben Habib as well. Is this not just pushing the base? And if you take the base for granted, that can bite you in the backside.
Well, I think if you look at the election results on the 1st of May, the electorate would take a very different view about where the base of support for reform is. The base of support for reform is everywhere. I think, you know, some of the things you just mentioned there have really had no impact on the party. Let's be real about that. 1st of May proved that with the vast, not just the wholesale result that reform received, but where it got that support. You know, Kent voters are very different to voters in Derbyshire. So I think, you know, I think that is debunked personally. But the point you're making is a good one. And someone like Adam Brooks is someone that doesn't keep his opinions to himself. That's what makes Reform a fantastic party to be a member of. And you talked earlier about the party I was in before and the party I'm now in. The open conversations that people have, especially at our branch meetings, are wonderful. People are allowed to have different views, and no one is criticised for that. And of course, we're 4 years from general election, assuming it's going to be in 4 years' time. There's going to be plenty of policy that people want to debate, and I think that should be welcomed, and it should be encouraged, actually. And I encourage all my members, as a branch chairman too, to share their views on any policy, and we do. And I think that's actually how you have a healthy political party. You don't all have to agree with everything all the time. That's perfectly acceptable, unlike in the Conservative Party, where if you go into a council meeting and you have a different view, maybe because you're going to stand up for your residents who knew a local councillor might want to do that, you're not threatened with losing a chairmanship of a committee or something.
Do you not think, though, that this does ask the question of how Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, who would themselves long-term have described themselves as Thatcherite, very liberal, very pro-free trade, so a US trade deal with chlorinated chicken could kill British poultry farming in this country, for example, that would be the concern and the threat, who would be small tax or small state, low tax. How do they somehow square this circle with their natural economic instincts? Because as someone who regularly gets told either to, come on Jonathan, join Reform, or someone who shares a lot of Reform voters' kind of views, I'm quite open about that. I think there's a cigarette paper between us.
By-election in Stoke-on-Trent recently, was it 60% Reform? 58%?
It was 58.5%. It was a big result. But do you not think that this is just going to be something that's too difficult to straddle, or undermine the £90 billion worth of tax cuts that Richard Tice said he wanted to enact if they had a Reform government in the first 100 days? How can you deliver tax cuts and increase the size of the welfare state?
Well, I think if you look at that very practically, you know, you have got in Nigel Farage and Richard Tice two very strong leaders of the party whose views are known, and I think, you know, you've just explained them to me very, very eloquently. I think what we've got here is a party that the direction of reform is very obvious, and voters know that. Voters trust the direction of reform. The nitty-gritty detail that you discuss, quite frankly, when you're out campaigning, people aren't worried about that as much. They trust the people they elect to make those calls. What people know is the direction of travel for the Reform Party, which is very simple. Family, community, country, controlling our borders and giving the British people priority, frankly. It feels like at the moment, if you are a working class person, you get up in the morning, you go to work, or if you're a pensioner, for example, who's worked hard all your life, the feeling at the moment is you're just not a priority for the state. That's got to change.
But isn't the nitty-gritty important? Because the nitty-gritty is what reassures the markets to avoid another Liz Truss-esque economic catastrophe.
The fact we're having this conversation, when you look at where the Reform Party was in a year's time, and now we're talking about the nitty-gritty of fiscal policy for a Reform majority government, goes to show that the Reform Party is doing a pretty good job at the moment.
That's very fair. Do you think this will undermine some of the tax cuts? Will Reform produce, whether it be a contract with the people like they did in 2019 or a manifesto, however they want to do it, will we see costings? Will there be credibility? Because this is now the big question for Reform. Post the 2026 elections, where we expect Reform to do very well in Wales, very well in Scotland, and very well in those metropolitan areas, Birmingham, Manchester, and even London, do you think we will then see real detailed, credible policy? Because for Reform to get to that majority that it needs to form a government, it's going to have to reassure business and reassure the markets that it's fiscally credible, certainly if it wants to take on the Labour Party and the Conservative Party.
Well, I think what you're going to see, actually, long before next year, is Reform majority-controlled councils giving a glimpse of what a Reform government culture is going to be like. I think you've already seen it with some of the things that our councils are doing already. And so I think what you'll see over the next year or so is the course, that taking its course. I think what you'll see next year, of course, is Reform doing very well, particularly in Wales. You mentioned Scotland too. Of course, there may or may not be, depends on if the local Conservatives and the Labour government want us to have elections in Essex again. Who knows? I can't believe they were cancelled. I still can't believe they were cancelled. So I think you'll see a big local election campaign one way or another happening next year. And I think in the background, what you'll see is Reform continuing to deliver its views. And I think one thing the Reform Party does, which I think is refreshing, constantly listening to people, constantly. You know, people like to laugh at Nigel Farage because he goes to the pub and talks to people, but you know what? That is a big part of the success of this party. We are listening to people, and I think that's been the biggest refreshing substance that Reform's offered at the moment. Like, the ears are wide open for people's ideas, and we're also, I think if you look at where we're polling particularly well at the moment, you look at East Anglia, for example, these people that really do graft, and it's quite expensive to live in lots of parts of East Anglia at the moment. People just feel like they're every time they go one step forward, they're going 5 steps backwards. Anything that shifts that and makes that better for people has got to be the right direction. But of course, the one thing that dominates the conversation in British politics at the moment is illegal immigration, and I think it's only right that we make that point to the British people. You know, the Reform Party are dead set on controlling this country's borders. We are an island, it shouldn't be impossible to do, and we are the only party really that I think has the trust of the British people when it comes to immigration.
Well, I will say this, Luke Trill from More in Common did some quite interesting focus group work where he said the same thing, that 10 to 15%, when you just ask people what do you think of it, they were saying keep the cap, don't scrap it. We've had quite a lot of calls saying the same thing. People should be able to only have children if they can be bothered to afford it. But Luke Shaw did say, the moment you start getting to the 30-second to 3-minute test and you talk about it, people do think that no child should be left in poverty and that child poverty should be eliminated. And I'm quite interested because I'm someone who's kind of in an area that I've represented in Stoke-on-Trent, being on my own sort of journey where I've said, actually, look, if this was a measure, even if you say it for 5 to 10 years, to eliminate initial child poverty, to give those children a chance through no fault of their own who are born into poverty, to then come up with a more fiscally, what I call natural conservative position, where that be allowing the personal allowance to be fully transferable, then I think actually Reform are on something. But I do think it's going to come down to the messaging on this. Is it about child poverty, or is it just about trying to outflank Labour? Because I think if it's trying to outflank Labour, voters will question the politics of it.
Jonathan, we don't need to outflank Labour, OK? Every time Keir Starmer does Prime Minister's questions, they do that themselves. Yeah, let's be real about that. We don't need to do that. And it's no different, by the way, for the Tory party. This is about, of course, it's about children and families. I mentioned that at the start. But you mentioned a by-election that just happened in Ongar. So Ongar is a pretty affluent area, been a Tory seat forever, part of a wider Essex Tory stronghold. 78% of the people there voted Reform. That particular ward is one of the most socially, economically challenged places that I represent, but I think it's number 2 in Essex for challenges. So when you talk about child poverty, there is a direct link between people who really feel like the state is letting them down and choosing to vote Reform because they see the hope and they see the opportunity for their lives to improve under a Reform government. I help at a local food bank that I helped set up in COVID, and when you speak to people there and you ask them why they're going, do you know most of these people work? Most of these people work. Something is going very wrong. Anything that helps families afford to live decent lives. And I'm not just talking about putting dinner on the table. Being able to take your family to Clacton for the weekend and be able to go on the rides and not worry too much about what you're going to not pay for the next 2 months shouldn't be a huge thing for a country, you know, in the G7, a country that is, you know, frankly, one of the most affluent countries in the world. You look at London and you go to the suburbs of London, you go to a place like Dagenham, you see challenges that people are facing on a daily basis. Any party that ignores that and doesn't try to lift children out of poverty, what are you going into politics for, would be my question.
Well, I think there's a result, isn't it? 40% of those on universal credit are actually in work, and the majority of people getting some form of child benefit are actually in work themselves, and I completely agree. I think there is something. Again, I come back to the framing will be interesting, but I think it's interesting that it is a test of that membership initially of, you know, with Reform, of how much can the base be kind of taken for granted. My advice would not to be.
What base voter of Reform? You take Essex as a base for Reform voters, right? I can't think of one affluent member in my branch that would have an issue with solving a big part of child poverty on day one of a Reform government by making that adjustment. So I think, you know, let's face it, let's not go too mad on the base vote there. And I don't think for a split second that one policy that someone might disagree with would in any way outweigh their support for Reform, when Reform ultimately is the only patriotic party in this country, I would argue, the only party that you see talking about important things that matter to the British people. I can't see the base support slipping over one policy, even if they disagreed with it that much.
So when Kevin Badenoch came out and said the Conservative Party completely disagree, this is socialism from Reform UK, do you guys care what the Conservative Party have to say at the moment?
Does anyone care? being honest here. I'm not being muggy here.
Well,
does anybody actually, when a Tory shadow minister goes on telly and does the rounds, does anyone actually have the volume up on their TV? Certainly the people I speak to don't.
Well, the local election results in Staffordshire where I'm from, and indeed the by-election in Stoke-on-Trent would suggest otherwise. 57 councillors down to 10, reform from 0 to 49.
Well, look at Kent is another great example. It doesn't matter where in the country, you know, they are actually a fantastic election asset to any other party other than the Conservative Party at the moment.
But what happens if a certain blonde bombshell called Boris Johnson, who everyone says is the only man that could take down Nigel Farage, if he decides to put his foot back in, if he comes back into Parliament somehow, if he manages to stop the Reform turquoise wave in a by-election and ends up back in Parliament, is Nigel Farage going to quake in his boots?
Boris Johnson said himself when he was pretty much booted out of office by public opinion at that time, although I do think a lot of your colleagues were very stupid to do that at the time. I think Boris Johnson himself used words, when the herd moves, it moves. The herd has moved. Boris, if he does it, I don't think it'd be a problem for the Reform Party, if that's the question you're asking. I think it'd actually make things worse for the Conservative Party, honestly, especially in certain parts of the country where he is absolutely loathed. So I don't think it'll be a problem. I can see a few people being excited about that in the Conservative Party because, quite frankly, anything is an upgrade on what's going on right now. I mean, look at the polling. I mean, you've got to wonder. You've got Jenrick sitting there in the wings, everyone thinking that's the solution. Do you know what actually does the Tory party no good, and I say this as someone that's been inside it, is this constant talk about who the next leader is. I mean, it's so embarrassing. They just cannot do their dirty washing in private. It is so embarrassing. And they are such a disunited party. Do you know, as the Essex County Councillor, when Kemi became leader of the party, whatever you might think of Kemi, but she's a nearby MP to me, and you know I've never had an issue with her as a local MP. What I find fascinating is I was the one at County Hall, right at the end of the meeting, that had to congratulate an Essex MP for becoming leader of the opposition. That is how embarrassing the Tory party is now. They are just, it's, you know, I feel so relieved not to be a part of it, I'll be honest with you, Jonathan. And I think a few decent people should relieve themselves of that worry.
Oh, I feel like you're tempting me there, Jamie.
I'm not trying, do you know what, I actually don't think the Reform Party has anything to gain from people defecting now. We're winning seats. We don't, you know, I think it was handy in the beginning. You know, I'm a Tory defector. I'm not going to make any qualm about that. I chose to join. I've always been to the right of the Conservative Party, that's for sure. And in fact, when I got selected for a seat, you know, I think it was a great match for me because it was a seat that completely loved Reform and would go Reform probably if there's a general election tomorrow. But I think what we've got in the Conservative Party is anybody with an opinion has to be silenced. I think that's their biggest problem. But that's why no one listens to him
So you don't
anymore.
fear Boris Johnson?
I'm not worried about Boris. I'd love to debate.
He can reinvent
him.
Man can reinvent himself more times than anyone cares to admit. He's got a huge personality, a huge personal following.
People will not forgive Boris for the big mistakes he made. And I was very quick to... I think he handled COVID initially. I think everyone didn't know what to do. But I think as detail emerges, I think there's been a lot of criticism into how Boris handled that. When you speak to people that work in the NHS, when you speak to people that really suffered during that time, I mean, I feel blessed that my family were okay at the end of it, but when you speak to business owners that were forced to shut their shops and couldn't even serve people at the door, meanwhile, if you take high street florists, for example, something I know a little bit about, you take a high street florist, high street florists were closed, yet you could go and buy all the flowers you wanted in a supermarket, and those same supermarkets were able to claim things like furlough. You know, I think when you look at some of that handling, which, by the way, a lot of that was Rishi too, let's not forget that, when you look at the handling of COVID, the lack of common sense approach to a lot of COVID, I think, frankly, backbench MPs had a role to play in that as well. Where were they? Where were they when our liberties were being taken just like that? You know, I think, you know, anyone that dare speak out about that was, you know, shot down by the press, by the leadership of the Tory party at the time. So I personally don't fear Boris Johnson. I actually think he could help Reform in a funny way. Don't forget, a lot of people that are in the Reform Party are very, very cross with the Conservative Party. That's never going to change.
You don't think that can come back at all?
I genuinely don't think... Look, crop this clip and play it to me in 4 years' time if Boris is leading the Tory party, and feel free to... I'll hold my hands up if I'm wrong. I don't see what is to gain by Boris coming back. And if he had any sense himself, I don't think he would do that.
And you mentioned Robert Jenrick. He's done Great worker calling out the two-tier justice. He's been doing lots of cut-through on social media.
He's waiting in the wings, isn't he? And almost all the Tory...
Could he take on... Do you reckon reform could suffer with Robert Jenrick?
I don't think people trust Robert Jenrick because he seems to have just become a different person. Not saying I disagree with what he's saying now. I'm sure a lot of it is his beliefs, but who knows?
Of the
a bit sceptical, isn't it? It's a bit like you're going to probably see going forwards a lot of Tories that used to go anti-reform, anti-reform, anti-reform. Now they suddenly think reform's a great thing and we've got to start listening to reform voters. There's very few people in the Conservative Party that have consistently been quite complimentary to reform.
And do you think, and you mentioned it earlier, it's quite interesting actually, and by the way, your point is actually I've heard from reform members in Stoke. They don't want lots more of these defectors to come in. They feel that if you weren't joining the revolution when Lee Anderson, for example, left, if you were a parliamentarian, that you're only doing it out of self-interest rather than actual true belief. Do you think it would? Do you think now that it's very unlikely to see many at all former Conservative MPs or Conservative MPs allowed to switch?
I'm just the county councillor. It's not for me to make these judgments, but I think if you're having the same conversations that I have with the membership, people are saying, well, I want to know why these people are defecting, and if it's just because they think they're going to lose their seat, then, you know,
we don't want them.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think Reform as a party, you know, when I talk to our members, they actually all are pretty in tune. Everyone kind of agrees on pretty much every political point that we make, and you know, I see as a branch chairman different parts of the constituency, everyone's kind of united on most fronts, and so you've got to be a reformer if you're going to be in the Reform Party. And if you've been so involved with the destruction of this country, wiping open the borders, allowing anybody to come here, I'm sorry, why are you here? Why are you a reformer if you are pro loads of mass immigration to this country?
And last one from me, Keir Starmer is fascinated with Nigel Farage in Prime Minister's questions.
Oh, he's obsessed.
And he keeps talking about, I think in the latest Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, he said that they're the opposition and has openly said that it will be Reform versus Labour. You fearing Keir Starmer? Are you thinking that he can maybe he can turn? He's got 4 years. He can turn this around. He can change opinion polling at him. Do you think that Keir Starmer is going to be the beast, or if he goes Wes Streeting, could he take the wind out your sail?
The Tory party brand is broken. They are definitely irrelevant, totally irrelevant. The Labour Party brand is really broken, and I don't think the British people will ever trust the Labour Party. Certainly not Labour heartlands will never trust Labour again. I don't think Wes Streeting can change people's minds. I don't think Angela Rayner can change people's minds. Personally, with Keir Starmer, all I want, because I'm a patriot, I love my country, I want the British Prime Minister to actually deliver so that British people benefit and that we don't look stupid on the world stage. Just look at the Chagos deal. I mean, how awful is that for this country? Humiliating for this country, actually. So I want someone that's in number 10 that's a genuine patriot. That's what the British people want. There's only one credible person that can do that job after the next election. That's Nigel Farage. And frankly, I don't think it would matter if the Labour Party found some amazing bombshell politician. I just don't. I think the brands are totally broken of the uni party. So it's for me, it's Nigel for number 10. I'm going to work every single day to help make that happen.
So the feeling on the ground is only Reform can undo Reform.
People ask me on the ground, people say, how long until Nigel becomes Prime Minister? That's what people say. How long do we have to wait? Is there anything we can do? That's why our membership's surging.
Well, final, I got a text from Dan. Jonathan, you should join Reform. Get Penny and Liz there too. I think Liz Truss might come with her own particular baggage, but you've been certainly making her ways there. Thank you so much to Jay McIver, Reform UK councillor. I'm very glad to have him on the show, and I love the robustness. So, and here we go. Reform can only undo Reform. Conservatives are done, as far as Jamie's saying. Labour are on the way out. Well, let's see next May. I personally have the belief we'll see Reform become the second at least largest party in Wales, maybe the first. I think they will end up being vying for official opposition in Scotland. You've got elections in Birmingham, Manchester, London boroughs, Bury, and other, St Helens, for example. And I think Labour have got 2,200 councillors up in defence, and I would not be shocked if we saw 1,000 to 1,500 Labour councillors. There's the clip to throw back at me on election night next year, but I wouldn't be shocked if we saw Labour losing big across there, as well as some of these elections for mayors in places like Essex. If they do indeed go ahead and no one plays silly buggers in the run-up to those elections, we'll see, I think, a Reform continue their turquoise wave. And as for the Conservative Party, well, I've got to say, chaps and ladies, I am all out of ideas how to save it. So hopefully you will call in 0344 499 1000 if you ever think the Conservatives can be saved, or if you want Reform UK all the way to number 10, or text the word TALK to 87222, or message us on X at talkTV. We'll see you after the break.
the politics of the past doesn't, account for what could be the future. So you've got to react. And so yesterday was a sign where she came out to say, actually, no, as a Tory party, we wouldn't abolish the two-child benefit
Yes,
cap.
clear blue water.
So that's clear blue water, clear turquoise oceans between the two. So that is now something that I think people will say, OK, if it's a choice now, if we're going to have a debate about the economy, what we can afford, what we can't, you've got three different policy positions there to make voters have a choice. If there's more of that comes forward, I think you might see, can we do better in the polls?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
I'm Jonathan Gullis. I'm here on Talk, the home of common sense, the political asylum. The great Kevin O'Sullivan is letting me take the hot seat whilst he's busy on the morning show. And blimey, what a show that we've had. Lots of amazing guests, lots of amazing opinions and passion, particularly there from Jamie just before the break. And now we go international. We go over to Errol Moorcoach, who's over in California from Republican Overseas, to discuss with him all that's going on when it comes to Donald J. Trump. Errol, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming on. Appreciate you joining us. If you don't mind, I'll just play a quick clip of President Trump giving his latest opinion on what's been going on in his conversations with President Putin of Russia.
Yeah, I'll give you an update. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
So, Mr. President, what do you want to do about that?
I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. We'll see what we're going to do. What am I going to tell you? You're the fake news, aren't you? You're totally fake. All right, any other questions? I don't like what Putin is doing, not even a little bit. He's killing people. And something happened to this guy, and I don't like it.
Well, very powerful words and punchy words there. Errol, President Trump has not been holding back when it comes to international diplomacy. I must say I was a huge fan of what we saw in the White House when it came to holding the South African Prime Minister accountable for what's going on there towards predominantly white farmers. Is he right to call President Putin crazy? Is that going to help anything? Does he now, as in President Trump, need to take more firm action? Is it time to really ramp up some sanctions on Russia?
Well, it's a tough situation because Putin is not responding to the overtures the Trump administration had hoped he would, and the collaboration and maybe relationship Donald Trump originally thought that he had with him isn't panning out, at least on the battlefield. They had a couple-hour phone call a few days ago, but from the end of that, there was no ceasefire. There was no result. When you talk about ratcheting up sanctions, really the next step is to start sanctioning other countries that do business with the Russians to block them out. And that gets into a little bit of a dicier situation. Additionally, there were reports, and it is out of there, so you never know, but there was a close call with Putin's helicopter, that they had almost been able to shoot it down, some drone situation. So this could be retaliatory, Putin's behavior. Obviously, in the peace talks, if there had been an attempt on his life, not giving him any excuses, but trying to figure out his psychology here. But Trump is obviously not happy. And I think the next step is to show a further military commitment to the Ukrainians. I think that's more plausible than the additional sanctions, which are going to go kind of on emerging market countries that are tied to the Russian economy, which will be tough for them. And I think the Russians will be less affected than we thought. Also with the original sanctions, we thought, wow, that's really going to buckle their economy. It didn't really. They're running a wartime economy. And Putin is obviously very angry, and he's not working with President Trump. So it's a disappointment all around. Do I think the language is helpful? Maybe, because it's Trump, and when he pushes a button, it gets the ball rolling in a different way. Usually that kind of language is deleterious to any sort of peace negotiations, but he has a point. When you're shooting missiles into civilian areas, and you're trying to talk about peace, it is crazy. And, you saw he called Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man. That ended up in at least peace talks. So, it can go a lot of ways, but overall, it's a disappointing beginning or middle part of this situation for President Trump and the Republican Party.
Over here in the UK, people would suggest that Trump is a Putin puppet. Some others would say he's a Putin apologist. Others would say that he's been completely mugged off by President Putin, that Donald J. Trump has basically he's been the perfect voice for the Putin propaganda against President Zelensky, against the Ukrainian people, and has therefore enabled President Putin to feel emboldened that he's basically got a soft touch in the White House. What would you say to that criticism?
I would say that, you just got to look at the scoreboard. If you look at the start of the century, you have George Bush as president, or W. Bush. Putin invaded Georgia. Then you have Obama. Putin took Crimea. Then you had Joe Biden, and he invaded the rest of Ukraine. And there was a guy in between that, Mr. President Trump, who they did not invade. Imagine you have a puppet, the guy who you've controlled. You finally get him in charge, and then you do nothing. You invade nobody while he's there. It's a poor strategy, I would say, if he was such a useful asset. In this situation, when they criticize him for at least, I see what they're saying when he pushes some Russian perspectives, but he's also trying to be a mediator, and he's come out and said that I'm here to mediate the situation. Means I'm going to go talk to the Russians, I'm going to go talk to the Ukrainians, and come back with that. Now, if he's going to at least be courteous in a mediator situation, he needs to at least put forth their perspective or understand their perspective. Now, their perspective, while morally repugnant, they do have at least a tactical argument that they've made for why this is going on, and that tactical argument is something that the U.S. military obviously respects. If they didn't respect it, the support for Ukraine would be different. So Vladimir Putin isn't coming to this with no cards either. The Russian military, while it's not quite able to project force like the Americans, is very good at its own border, and that's where they are. So I think that's the rock and the hard place. It's tough to say which way to go on this.
Do you think that it's been bad? That the scenes we saw in the White House between President Trump and President Zelensky were unedifying, that the US mineral deal that's been requested is simply just going to take resource out of Ukraine rather than give them the ability to rebuild? Or is it actually a stroke of genius? Is it smart to have US workers on the ground? Because ultimately that buys US into Ukraine to try and prevent any further Russian aggression once a peace deal can be agreed.
It buys that integration, and it also, if you'll see around the world, the U.S. will embed in Kurdistan, for example, we'll embed U.S. special forces there. That way, the Turkish can't bomb the Kurdish forces that are potentially separatists there. So Americans, by putting Americans in harm's way, in a weird way, create bubbles of safety. Now, when you look at that deal, I think it's really important to understand. In any other situation, the people who are financing the deal, who are going to bring the technology and all the expertise and the money, are going to do a 90-10 split. That's how it's done across all markets where there's minerals to be had. Doing a 50-50 deal is very generous, and that's almost intended entirely to stimulate the local, or Ukrainian national economy. So I would say 50-50 is incredibly generous. It's something that's not done in the private sector, that only a state-to-state S2S relationship could emerge, as rare as that is. And I think it's a really great sign of America's furthering commitment. And keep in mind the billions and hundreds of billions we've already given from our taxpayers, and I think that this deal ties us in further, and you can win battles with ledgers and accounting rather than bullets and rockets, I think.
Well, going on to another story, Errol, if you don't mind. President Trump has now delayed what it was going to be a 50% tariff on the European Union. He's extended that deadline now to the 9th of July, following a call that was instigated by the European Union President, Ms von der Leyen, who earlier on Sunday night said she had a good call with President Trump and that Europe is ready to advance talks swiftly and decisively to reach a good deal. We would need the time until the 9th of July. Is this just showing us the art of the deal that President Trump's always been good at? That ultimately he's put the squeeze, he's put the threat out there. Yes, it might be rough and ready politics that from a bygone age, but by jolly, does it get people to the table and minds concentrated and people quickly coming up with things they're willing to trade on and off, rather than wishy-washy memos sent between lots of civil servants that never result in any meaningful deal?
Oh, absolutely. This is the first time we have a businessman in the White House. It's only been a statesman or a war hero before. He's got a 4-year term, nothing after that, and he's here to close deals. And I think the Europeans and other people have caught on that if you come to the table quickly, the Trump administration or the Trump negotiating team might not even be ready for that. You might have a better deal coming quickly than sitting back and allowing them to think about it. So I was actually very encouraged to see the Europeans reach out and want to have that deal. And they didn't ask for very much of a delay, really. It was very reasonable. And Trump's obviously happy to give it. I think he's more focused on rebalancing that trade imbalance on the industrial goods and protecting the U.S. tech companies as well. We have a lot of money that's trapped in Ireland that ideally would be tax revenue for the U.S. tax base from American companies. And that's something that's obviously big for the Irish economy, but also a big thing that Trump's working on for the American people who sent him there to do stuff like that. So there are going to be areas where we can negotiate, and especially on tariffs with industrial products, pharmaceuticals, cars, these type of things. And I think what Trump wants more than anything is a deal, a better deal, and he wants to have a deal with everybody, even if it's a small deal. That's the kind of guy he is, and I think the Europeans are understanding it, and they realize we're their best ally. We're the guys who spend money to defend and propagate Western values, and I think they'll come along with us, and it'll be a better than the first time around where they were very anti-Trump. Now I think they're working with us. It'll be better for everybody all around.
I think it's interesting you said small deal, because I think a lot of criticism in the UK from certain political opponents of the government was that the deal with the US was small. It didn't get the UK back to the pre-tariff terms, but it was certainly improvement on what the tariffs were. And I suggest from what you're saying there that actually sometimes just getting a small deal, building some goodwill with this administration goes a long way to when you want to get a much bigger slice of the pie going forward, knowing that also that Trump does drive a hard bargain, and there's going to have to be some trade-offs, and again focus minds on what are you truly willing to dig your heels in versus what are you willing to try and find a way forward on.
Oh, I would agree completely, and you gotta pick and choose with President Trump what hill you're gonna die on, and I think it's a better choice in a lot of times to go with the perspective he has. Now that doesn't mean the Europeans shouldn't negotiate for the best deal for their people and shouldn't maybe take that first small deal as you guys have in the UK and then use that to your advantage going down the line. I mean he's somebody who's willing to work with other people and somebody who wants to unlock the resources and the actual might of all of these countries, especially in regards to the drilling in the North Sea and certain interests that he has in the UK himself. So I would agree with your analysis completely there.
And finally from me, Errol, there's been an amazing story coming out that from the State Department that officials are examining the treatment of Lucy Connolly. Lucy Connolly, who did write an awful post on social media, but deleted it 4 hours later, and a couple of days after gave a full apology and accepted that she had been swept in by malicious and untrue statements. And yet, for the crime of having a social media post and deleting it, was to receive 31 months in prison, has recently had her attempt to appeal that rejected in the UK court, and yet there are literal paedophiles walking the streets of this country who have had suspended sentences. In fact, Robert Jenrick pointed out that there was one domestic abuser with 52 prior offences who got off with just a suspended sentence, and a paedophile with 110,000 indecent images of children also let off. How interested, and JD Vance kind of has raised this before, how seriously should the UK government take the fact the US administration is very concerned about how free speech is being looked after in the UK? And quite frankly, should the UK even care what the US thinks in this regard?
Well, I think that the concern should be from the American people who have put these people in office who are showing this concern. So it's when your special relationship, when your closest allies, maybe your best ally, reaches out and says, "Hey, we think you've kind of gone off kilter. You've lost your way here." That's what a good ally should do. Now, I don't think that this would be something that we blow up any sort of alliance about, but it certainly seems to be a very large custodial sentence on something that in America you would not have even been arrested for because of our First Amendment. And it's not America's business to tell any country, as Trump has recently said, by the point of the gun, we shouldn't be spreading democracy. The same way we shouldn't be going around and telling people how to run their country. But since we have such a good relationship, since we go back so far, I think it's fair for us to reach out and say, hey, this really seems antithetical to Western values, 31 months in prison for a post. And it stands out to the American people who are voting for our politicians who are coming and saying that. So it's not just the Trump administration in America who feels that way. It's a lot of Americans who, just the same way a British person who's not paying a lot of attention might say, well, there's a lot of gun violence in America. That's kind of creepy. The same thing, Americans, yeah, I've never really been to London, but I hear you can't make a social media post. So that's sort of where it is. And I think it's something that the British shouldn't care about on a macro scale, but on the micro sense, it could be valuable to potentially look at the Americans as a leadership role in free speech, which at least this administration has been part of, and the censorship and everything that went across the board, including in America in the last admin, and then going back, maybe take another look at that. And if you still decide that having her in prison for 31 months is the way to do it, then it's not our business. But at least it's our business to maybe reach out and question why.
Well, Errol Moore, coach from Republican Overseas, thank you so much for joining us today and putting forward those perspectives. If you're interested to tell us what you thought, call 0344 499 1000, text in the word talk at the start of your message to 87222, or follow and message us on X at talkTV. After the break, we'll be taking your calls and reading out your messages.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back with me, Jonathan Gullis, here on the home of common sense on Talk, stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on the Political Asylum show. And wow, what a show we've had indeed. And we've got lots of texts and lots of callers, and I don't want to waste any time. So we're going to start by going to Gemma in the great county of Staffordshire, who wants to talk winter fuel. Hi, Gemma, how are you?
I'm all right, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you, Duck. Are you keeping okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Well, I say I'm good. I've just come back to England from Lanzarote.
Oh, OK, so you've come from the sunshine back to the wet and cold.
Basically, yes.
OK, well, look, you tell me. So I've got here, it's good that Sir Keir Starmer's willing to U-turn. It means he's thinking about stuff. Do you think that you would give Sir Keir Starmer the benefit of the doubt by this U-turn?
No, I voted for him, so I'd like to think that he could change his mind. I mean, honestly, if you're a person that can't change your mind, you are below, you're kind of swimming with the, oysters. You know, you've got to be able to change your mind. It's a manly thing to do. Actually, no, not manly. What can you say these days? It's kind of like a huge...
Manly's fine, don't you worry, Gemma. This is the home of free speech as well. We're not going to have a chastise you over something that's just normal to say.
No, but honestly, Jonathan, right, how do I actually say that? You've got to be able to change your mind. You've got to be able to reflect on your opinions. You've got to be able to think, oh, my God, I was an absolute idiot the other day when I thought this and that. And he's a lawyer. I warned everyone, all my friends, I said, you're going to put a lawyer in charge. Good luck, you know what I mean?
I think you're right, by the way. I think the public actually do generally respect people just fronting up, right? We all make mistakes in life. We all sometimes have to say sorry to a loved one, a friend, or even a colleague. And it's not...
Yeah, because you had that Matthew Torbit on, didn't you, about the... Because his girlfriend's in Liverpool or something. Yes. It's an awful tragedy. And so I really rang up about the benefits thing, so the winter fuel, but it's also the two-child cap.
Oh, yes, please, tell us what you think.
Well, I don't know, it's about $5 billion in it or something he's got to pay back. Is that right?
About $3.5 billion the policy would cost.
I'm rubbish at maths. But basically, I'm not getting any children, but I do care a lot about the winter fuel thing, because my mum has said all along, right, she's voted Labour all her life, you know, she doesn't deserve it, doesn't want it, blah, 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 and blah. And then he cut it for everybody, more or less, it seems. And I was just saying there, because I'm a teacher, I was just sort of saying, like, then what about £18,000 cut off? Not like whatever it was, 13,000 or something, Jonathan?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's interesting. I personally think the problem is means testing it might cost quite a lot for what is essentially a small, about 1.5 billion.
They always say that, right, Jonathan? They always say that. What do you do for a living before, like, TV and that?
Well, it's a good point. I mean, look, I'm quite open to the idea of saying you give it to everyone, then you reclaim it back through people who file their tax return. So the wealthiest, for example, don't get it. Or you have a scheme where somehow people can voluntarily say, please take me off the list. You know, people can automatically sign up to pay more tax if they want to. Why can't people sign up? But I think with the... I do think that it is... I don't think U-turning is a bad thing as long as you own that you made a mistake. But the longer you drag it out and the more you try and fluff up that you're doing it... The problem is, the more people think you're being disingenuous about it, if they think you're only doing it for political reasons rather than just saying, I got it wrong, then I think that will come back to haunt him.
Yeah, but going back to the world of the people, like Nigel Farage speak, yeah?
Yeah.
The other day, someone said to me, where was I born? I said, I was born in a market Harbour, and then he goes, well, where are you really from? I was like, well, near Luton. Do you know what he said?
What's
I
that?
thought it was racist. He said Luton-stan.
Oh, wow, that is not appropriate at all.
No good. So all good then, yeah?
No, all good. Well, look, Gemma, thank you so much.
We voted Labour, but we think they're rubbish at the moment, so we'd like to turn around again, and I don't know. It's Bank Holiday Monday. Happy Bank Holiday, Jonathan. I don't think I've spoken to you before.
Well, thank you so much for calling in, Gemma. Really appreciate that call, and really nice to hear from someone who's a Labour voter who says that they're not happy with what Labour's doing. Georgina, who's now in London. Raina, not a surprise as she tries to become the Prime Minister. What do you say, Georgina?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, Jonathan, if Raina wasn't rubbing her hands together, getting her gloves on, and going to have a shot at the Prime Ministerial title. You know, the writing's on the wall for Keir Starmer. He's most definitely not on the proverbial transfer list at the moment, but he soon will be. This man has broken every promise that he's made to the people of this country in his manifesto, throwing the elderly, farmers, disabled, taxpayers, NHS, education system, and let's not forget the betrayal, Brexit betrayal. In fact, he's thrown all of us under the bus, including, might I add, his own front and backbenchers, who quite frankly look as though they've lost the will to live at PMQs, and their core values have been thrown to the wind. When die-hard Labour voters and members like James Mathewson, who I saw today, when they're saying that Starmer's policies are way offline, then, you know, and they're venting displeasure at the way the governor is governing, then you can take it as gospel. There's a serious problem. Keir Starmer has probably resigned himself to the fact that his leadership days are numbered, and that, you know, his hand is the hand that's holding the spade that's dug the hole to bury Britain in. What he said about reinstating the pensioners' winter fuel allowance is just damage limitation, Jonathan. And like all his promises, this will probably come to nothing. There's nothing that Keir Starmer could do now to reinstate his credibility. You're talking about a man who's even tried to plagiarise policies from opposing political parties to try and sound viable. Well, it's not working, Mr. Starmer, and the rest of the Labour Party front bench know that.
Well, Georgina, sorry, if you don't mind, sorry, because I have to go to break. Can I just say, I hope the team here at Talk clip what you've just said, because that's a speech that I think only a member of the public could give, and no politician has the guts to say it. But my God, I would be out there rallying the troops for you and knocking on doors for you if we had more politicians saying what you have to say. And thank God that you said it, and said it so eloquently about where things currently are. And I agree with you. I think Keir Starmer will struggle to turn around those personal poll rating numbers. I do wonder if it will be a matter of when, not if, with regards to his future leadership. But I tell you what, he is. I think the public do not forgive or forget like they used to. And we have a litany of things that he said in the past, whether that be in writing or on video, and things that he's saying now that completely contradict that. And that is only ever going to bite someone in the bottom. You make sure you tune in to Talk. You carry on here for the final 10 minutes in the political asylum. 0344 499 1000. Text in the word Talk to 87222 or message us on X at talkTV.
the politics of the past doesn't, account for what could be the future. So you've got to react. And so yesterday was a sign where she came out to say, actually, no, as a Tory party, we wouldn't abolish the two-child benefit
Yes,
cap.
clear blue water.
So that's clear blue water, clear turquoise oceans between the two. So that is now something that I think people will say, OK, if it's a choice now, if we're going to have a debate about the economy, what we can afford, what we can't, you've got three different policy positions there to make voters have a choice. If there's more of that comes forward, I think you might see can we do better in the polls.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Back right at the end of this great show, the Political Asylum, me, Jonathan Gullis, stepping in for Kevin O'Sullivan on Talk, the home of common sense. And I want to make sure that I say a massive thank you to the team behind the glass, particularly someone who's been in and out of this booth to make sure they keep sticking this earpiece back in my ear almost between every break, as well as the Gen Zers who are flying the woke flag behind the screen for me to try and keep me on track. But I know my great producer Samara, who is not taking any prisoners with her very sound views when it comes to the war on woke. But we are the home of free speech. We have lots of views and opinions, and that is what we need it to be here. Now, look, what some texts have come in. You've got here from Brian, who's in Spain, saying, you will remember that Trump and Vance accused President Zelensky of gambling with World War III. Well, I would say it's actually Trump who is doing just that. He needs to decide which side he's on and stop dithering and posturing. His indecisiveness on supporting Ukraine is giving Putin time and power to destroy and grab further Ukraine territory, pushing the West ever nearer full-scale war. We should send a strong message to Trump. Are you in or are you out? Another one. Hi, Jonathan, this is from Pam. Regarding the child benefit cap, why not abolish it like the pensioners' winter fuel allowance? I'm approaching 80 and we didn't have children unless we could afford them. Perhaps it could be adjusted in a tax allowance so only working people received it. I understand there are up to 60% of some ethnic people who do not work and have never worked in the UK but receive all the benefits. Perhaps they should go to work and they would have less time for procreation. A very punchy comment there by Pam, not something I can endorse, but obviously, again, people are entitled to their opinion. We've got another one here saying Starmer would sooner give money and support to illegal migrants than our own pensioners and disabled children. He is a traitor to the British people and will get his just deserves when the people get the opportunity to kick him out. That's from Deborah, also in Spain. And another one from Denise. Great to see you back on TV, Jonathan. Congratulations on your local mayor job. Yes, I am the mayor of Kidsgrove Parish, for anyone who's interested. Starmer is cozying up to the EU, so when he's ousted, he'll get a job in Brussels. Good riddance. Stephen has texted in, if reform raised the tax threshold to 20,000, then many benefits are not needed if you are in work, including child benefits. Also, pensioners would get a big enough tax break to offset the winter fuel allowance removal. Transferable tax relief would also be a big positive. Okay, interesting. They hadn't considered that with the 20%. And then Betty. Hi, Jonathan. She really likes Matthew Torbett, former Labour advisor, a great guy and a great friend of us here on Talk. He's like the Labour I used to be a member of as a kid. What does he think of the following? Well, I'll make sure he gets this, Betty. A 30% flat tax for all income, including benefits. 20,000 tax-free allowance for all. 2-year limit to non-medical benefits. Not medical or no contribution, basic support only. A £10,000 tax relief on all your services you don't take from the state. Cut to 10% corporate, 15% VAT, 5% capital gains tax, 1% stamp duty. Wow, a lot there. And push the net zero out to push the net zero away from 2050. Betty will pass it on. But let's get to our last caller. We've got Frank from Bristol who wants to talk about chemical castration, who's questioning how will this work for female paedophiles, for example. Hi, Frank.
Hello. Yeah, I was chatting to somebody that spent a bit of time at a woman's prison, and she said you would be shocked at the amount that are there for paedophilia. Now, I fully agree with extreme measures being taken against these people, but if it's going to be a chemical thing that stops certain reactions is in a man's body, what would they do about these women?
Well, it's interesting, Frank. I'm not sure what the medication does to women. It's something I'll have to go away and look into. I'm assuming it just impacts both men and women in terms of certain emotions or feelings or sex drive. But I will get that confirmed next time that I'm sure, and hopefully we speak. And thank you for calling in. Unfortunately, I have to cut you off because we're not far off from the end of the show. But thank you for posing that important question about what do we do. Paedophiles are not just men, they are women, although they are overwhelmingly majority male when it comes to the convictions and the cases that are dealt with. But are Labour going to win back loads of support by doing what many people would love to see? In fact, people would suggest let's go further. They would want to open the whole debate about whether or not we bring back capital punishment for things like paedophilia as well as murder and terrorists. Now, whatever your view, this is where the home of free speech belongs, because we want to hear your views. And I want to say a massive thank you to all of you for tuning in. We've had the obviously very difficult news about the terrible incident that's taken place in Liverpool. And to remind you, before I hand over to Petri, who will be